Okay, good morning, everyone. We're about to start the regular meeting of the LA County Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission. And I'm Sean Kennedy. I'm currently the chair of this commission. And before I begin, I'm supposed to give a quick overview of the work that we do because apparently our interim executive director thinks that not everyone knows that. So it says our commission is advisory, not investigatory. What I would say is this: we investigate the big picture. We're not so good at individual cases, which we have to refer on to either the IG or the sheriff's department to do that. But our goal is to have robust, hard-hitting but respectful conversations with our friends at the sheriff's department and our community members who I feel like are our friends as well at this point, and really talk about hard issues. But we do ask that everyone respect each other because we are all in this together. And there is no way that we are going to be able to solve the problems of policing in our community unless we can all sit in a room and talk to each other honestly. I'm not talking about pulling punches, but respectfully. Okay, so today we're going to have some elections. We're going to pick a chair and a vice chair, and we're going to discuss a topic that I think is really important to everyone, and that is the mental evaluation teams, the so-called MET teams. And we have three speakers who are going to talk about them. And we'll also discuss the Sheriff's Department's use of tasers. And we have people from the company that makes them, as well as members of the department and a professor who studies these issues to address your concerns about tasers. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric to explain how you can participate in this meeting, because I know many people are online.
Thank you, Chair Kennedy. Good morning and welcome. Public participation in our meeting is one of our main goals, and we welcome your comment in person, through WebEx, by phone, or in writing. There will be an opportunity for public comment on each item and at the end of the meeting during general public comment. For items on the agenda, Chair Kennedy will introduce the item, presentations will be heard, the commission will discuss the item, and then public comment will be taken. If you wish to speak in person, please fill out a public comment card and turn it in at the table with the public comment card sign. If you are on WebEx, please raise your hand by selecting the hand symbol. And if you called in to listen to the meeting, please press *3 on your phone to activate the raise hand feature. We ask that all speakers ensure your comments abide by the meeting's code of conduct. Everyone will have 2 minutes to speak unless the chair determines otherwise based on the number of speakers signed up for each item. We will make a similar announcement in Spanish, and then I will take the roll.
Buenos días y bienvenidos. La participación pública en nuestras reuniones es uno de nuestro objetivo principal y agradecemos sus comentarios en persona y a través de WebEx, por teléfono y por escrito. Habrá una oportunidad para comentarios públicos sobre cada tema de la agenda y al final durante los comentarios general. Para los temas de la agenda, el Chair Kennedy presentará el tema, se escucharán las presentaciones, los miembros de la comisión discutirán el tema y después tomarán los comentarios del público. Si desea comentar en persona, complete una tarjeta de comentarios y entrégasela a un miembro personal en la mesa asignada con el cartel de comentario público. Si está participando por WebEx, levante la mano y seleccione la imagen de la mano si quiere comentar. Si llamó para escuchar la reunión, oprima la tecla de la estrella y el número 3 en su teléfono para activar la función de la mano levantada. Les pedimos a todos los participantes que van a comentar que sus comentarios cumplan con el código de conducta de la comisión. Todos los participantes que van a dar un comentario tendrán 2 minutos para comentar, a menos que el Chair Kennedy determine lo contrario en el tiempo asignado. Muchas gracias.
Chair Kennedy, I'm going to take roll now. Chair Sean Kennedy,
Here.
Vice Chair Jamone Hicks,
Present via video.
Commissioner Robert Bonner,
Present.
Commissioner Irma Higgins Cooper,
Present.
Commissioner Luis S. Garcia,
Here.
Commissioner Patricia Giggins,
Here.
Commissioner James P. Harris,
Here.
Commissioner Hans Johnson.
Here.
Chair Kennedy, we have a quorum. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. The first matter is the consent calendar. I think this is, one day I'll learn what the consent calendar actually is. We have to approve the June 15th
yes.
meeting minutes. Are there any objections? Not hearing any objections. The consent calendar is approved. There we go. And we would ordinarily take family impact remarks, but we don't have anyone here today who has asked to make those remarks. So I think it's time for public comment on item number 1. Is there anybody signed up?
No one has signed up in person for public comment.
Okay, so well, what does that mean? Okay.
No one online either, Chair Kennedy.
Okay, so we're going to go to various reports, and we have Sheriff Luna here who can't be here the full time. Sheriff, we appreciate you being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you first because I want to hear everything that you want us to hear.
Thank you, Chair Kennedy. Good morning to all of our commissioners and community members. I want to start off by saying that we did something a little bit different this time around. I believe most of you may have received a 12-page document that we drafted, put together, which basically outlines each of the recommendations that this commission has laid out and our progress on them or lack of progress and why, and more importantly. So I'll be here to answer any questions to any of those, but I'd like to thank Director Eileen Decker, who can't be here this morning because she's meeting with the federal monitors from the Antelope Valley this morning, for all the work she put into the document. And I think you'll find it pretty comprehensive, and it lays out, again, what we're doing and some of the challenges we're facing. But I think we are progressing probably as quickly as we can at this time period. Any questions about that before I comment on something else I wanted to comment on?
Just that if I could appreciate the update, Sheriff, on it. And I realize that you're moving out on the issue of the eradication of deputy gangs and deputy cliques within the department. And we applaud that effort. And I thought the overview you gave us was quite helpful. Thank you. And thank Eileen as well.
Yes, sir.
Just to note for the other commissioners, it looks like that was not forwarded to everyone, so I will forward it to you. It's an update about the recommendations.
Yeah, whatever we could do to assist to make sure each of the commissioners receive that document. And the Inspector General as well. You haven't received it.
I did get it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The other thing, if I can comment on, I know on the agenda, we have either a briefing or questions to be asked about the incident that occurred in Lancaster and Palmdale, which has received a lot of media attention. And what I want to say about that, and in a sense, I wish I could say a lot more, but I'm in a position now as your sheriff where the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office have come in collected materials, and they now have this investigation. So any specific questions related to any one of those two incidences have to be referred to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, where they will comment on those cases.
Is that it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any questions from the commissioners?
I just had a comment more than a question, but I just wanted to say that I thought, Sheriff, your handling of the use of force incident in Lancaster and the earlier use of force incident in Palmdale was deserves some kudos. We've never had a sheriff that came out so quickly, released the videos before. So I just want to say kudos to you, Sheriff, for your handling of that. Of course, at some point, it's good that it's being investigated by the Bureau and all of that, but at some point we'll want to follow up. But I just wanted to say that we didn't miss the fact that you were out front. You really showed leadership on that issue. So thank you.
Anyone else? Any other commissioners? I mean, we have the sheriff here. This is your
Well,
time.
I appreciate you stepping up and coming out as quickly as you did, because that really helps the community show that you are interested in what's going on there. So
Patty?
Yeah, I guess I'm just being an echo, but I think it was actually startling, like when I saw that, and refreshing, and how immediately and how thoroughly you responded as well as you could with some constraints. And I think it's, you haven't been here that long, and I think this was one of the major upticks so far of you demonstrating your commitment to transparency and communication with the public and us.
And part of that transparency is echoing what common sense and what millions of Angelenos were saying upon seeing the video. Simply calling it disturbing was a helpful manifestation of a sense of conscience in the department. And the fact that that word and the characterization of the Winco video echoed around the country was telling about the fact that there is now a conscience and a statement of common sense in the sheriff's department. And for that, I think I personally found that very refreshing, and also a signal of hope to people who come to these meetings and who use our forums as a means to get their own experiences and testimonials on the record.
Anyone else? Well, Sheriff, I agree. I thank you for releasing the videos. I think it's helpful. One struggle that I think this commission has is ALADS, the union, feels free to talk about the incidents in the press and comment on them. And so, they're talking about it in ways that I have no way of looking into, but I think time will tell. So we'll just keep at it.
One question I do want to raise is about the Palmdale episode and the tracking of the 1 year on incidents, and whether the filing, the personnel action taken just barely within the 1 year expiration of opportunity to do so, whether there's any concern that should raise about the tracking of time post incidents, and whether there's any update that you feel able to give to this commission about the tracking of time for accountability purposes.
That's an excellent question. And I wanted to come back around, and although because of the federal investigation, I'm limited in what I can talk about in regards to details about the incidences. But what I will say, and I want to say actually a couple of things, is that I spent all of Tuesday, I actually went out in uniform on a ride-along out in the city of Lancaster for several hours. I went to go talk to many of our deputies in the roll call at Lancaster, And then I repeated that in the afternoon and evening in the city of Palmdale. And and I don't know if many of our commissioners have been on a ride-along out there. I encourage each and every one of you to do so. And the reason I say that is because in the 3 to 4 hours I spent out in Lancaster in the black and white, the level of commitment, empathy that I witnessed from our deputies working in the field was absolutely off the charts amazing. They were incredible people doing some amazing work. And they were going from call to call, burglary in progress, robbery, having to kick in the door of somebody who was ill and trying to provide assistance. I mean, just over and over again, just absolutely amazing. So as we work through some of these incidences that we're talking about, I just want our community not to forget the 99% of our employees that are out there every day doing an absolutely amazing job and very committed to doing what they're doing. So Commissioner Johnson, to go back to your question, as we go through this, my perspective is that, and I've talked about it from the very beginning, is to hold individual employees accountable for their actions. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I'm not also looking at the systems that are in place, whether we're talking about the way investigations are conducted, who's doing them, even getting down to the way questions are being asked within those interviews, the timelines for them. And then I'm even looking for deficiencies in our use of force policies. I know Eileen Decker is working very hard to update our use of force policies. I actually talked to her about it this morning on the way in, about our progress. And there's a lot of work to be done there. And I want to make sure that our employees in the field are armed with the best policies and training to support that policies. And then our supervisors understand it, so they're holding our employees accountable. And that's the process that we're going through. It's extensive. It takes a lot of work. There will be changes that occur. When we start doing those at the right time with the policies going through the process, we'll make sure to communicate that to this body and publicly. But there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes. So.
Just to ask a quick follow-up to that.
Yes.
That I think Commissioner Johnson, in part, I don't want to read his mind here, is a bit concerned, and I have a slight concern that the question is whether you believe there's an adequate tracking system to make sure that the 1-year time limit for discipline isn't blown. And I realize there's some tolling in there, and this is but it's important, Sheriff, that be tracked. I just assume that it is being tracked, and that there are not situations occurring where discipline should be imposed but can't be imposed because of the 1-year time bar. So it's just a question of a process of tracking that satisfies you that it's being done. And I don't even need an answer right now, but I just appreciate it if you'd looked into it and just make sure that there's a sound tracking process so we don't miss, deputies that should be disciplined should not escape discipline because of the 1-year time bar. Somehow or another, that just can't be allowed to happen. Looks like Mr. Huntsman might want to respond to that question. Max?
Yes, this is something that, of course, the concern of two of our commissioners echoes concerns that this body has had for years, and my office has had for years, and the Sheriff's Department has had for years, and has various solutions to what you're talking about. Tracking system, they have it. Internal Affairs does indeed track the progress of cases. Their computer system tracks when they believe the statute date will run based on Those of us who've been involved in prosecution know the statute of limitations process and the different things that can trigger it. They do a reasonable job of documenting when the statute will run, so it is tracked. Unfortunately, it has always been the practice of the Sheriff's Department to age that statute too far. And so as a result, it is often the case that a decision regarding discipline is made very late in the day. And as a result,
Why is that?
well, one thing is that the one-year statute of limitations is tight. Another reason is that their POBAR provides a variety of protections to individuals, and that means lawyers. So when there's the beginning of an investigation and a call goes out to interview a deputy regarding an incident, the lawyer invariably will not be ready the next day. And so that delays things a bit. Also, as we've discussed previously, Gates-Johnson is a serious impediment in shooting cases, not relevant to the cases we're talking about now. So there's a variety of them. In early 2021, my former chief deputy wrote an extensive report on the discipline system and made a variety of recommendations, including addressing this problem that I think are important to implement at some point in the Sheriff's Department. We haven't seen any movement of that for years, and now with a new administration, we're hoping that there'll be some look at that, and I think that's part of what Eileen Decker is on board to do, is do that analysis, and I hope that she comes to good conclusions in that process. With respect to these particular incidents, I know the sheriff is limited in what he can say about them themselves, and I don't have anything helpful to say about the incidents themselves, but I will point out that fundamentally, the problems raised by these two videos are problems that this body has been talking about for years, that the federal and state governments have brought actions against the Sheriff's Department regarding, including the disparate impact of the way policing is done on the street, particularly in the Antelope Valley. And we've written reports regarding these issues. So I think the larger problem is a systemic one, independent of what happens in these individual cases. I'm sure they'll be investigated appropriately. I hope they will be, and we'll certainly monitor that. But beyond that, as the sheriff, I think, has said, and as more than one of our commissioners has said, we need policies that are very specific and give direction to deputies about what they can and can't do. And head strikes is a problematic area in the way that the policies are written in the Sheriff's Department, as is discretion to arrest and the manner in which the decision is made. And then, of course, tasers, which is on deck for today. And I won't steal the thunder of that process because we're about to engage in it.
You went pretty far afield there, Max, but let me just say that when you exercise discipline, which is termination, that's the maximum the sheriff can do, and he did it, all right, in the Palmdale use of force incident. So the record speaks for itself, and I think that's important. That sent a powerful message, a powerful deterrent message to everybody in the Sheriff's Department. So enough said.
I have just one more question. Sheriff, I believe what you said about the very good policemen in the area, and they are really concerned about the citizens. But years ago, they were under federal restrictions, and today we're back to the same place. So my concern is making sure that there is follow through and there's monitoring, and to make sure that the culture is truly changing. And the good policeman is what we see throughout Antelope Valley.
I agree. And we do have a consent decree that's been in place since 2015 out there. It hasn't gone away. It never stopped. One can definitely argue about the level of priority that was given in the past. Can't ignore that, but I'm focused on what we're doing from here on out. I've testified before, or have spoken, I should say, not testified, in front of this commission on several occasions that when we passed our budget this year, the Office of Constitutional Policing was a big part of how we were going to move forward. Eileen Decker's name's come up several times already in this meeting. A big part of her office is compliance with the consent decrees. As a matter of fact, she is not here because she is speaking with or meeting with the federal monitors from the Antelope Valley settlement agreement, and they're going to be with us. A lot of discussions going on behind the scenes. And I believe that it will help us move forward. And we have to make sure that from a policy perspective, from a training perspective, that we're complying with those agreements. And the federal monitors have made it clear to us that there are gaps that exist and have existed. So our job is to close those gaps. And I've said this before, the ultimate goal is to change our behavior and put the consent decrees behind us, because they are costing our taxpayers a lot of money. And that's the vision.
One other question, shifting gears just slightly. Having been in an LA County jail this week up at the North County Correctional Facility, I just wanted to raise the issue of instructions to watch commanders about the presence of civil brand commissioners at jails. And it seemed that the watch commander was operating off of an old letter or directive about the ability of civil brand commissioners to visit and view jail conditions unescorted at the facilities. And unfortunately, the old guidance stipulated that they be escorted. And I wanted to just note for the record that that was outdated guidance and it was not correct. And that if there could be an updated directive to jail watch commanders or to each facility so that the unescorted access of civil brand commissioners was made plain, that would be much appreciated and would effectuate the mission of those commissioners, as well as those who might be with them in the course of doing oversight of jail conditions.
If I could just add to that, yeah, that concerns me greatly, and I'm sorry to hear that. I will say that I had just the opposite experience when I went to Twin Towers twice here in the last month, and was able to walk right up to main control, show my ID, go inside, and was provided access without escort anywhere I wanted to go in the facility. And the same was true at MCJ. So that's good, but I am troubled to hear that they hadn't got the message at NCCF, because that's a message that needs to be gotten out to all of our custody facilities.
Yes, sir. And maybe off to the side, Commissioner Johnson, if you can give that to our executive director, the date, time, and who was contacted, so we can make the adequate corrections.
So to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to add as well, I think these examples of just like what we heard right now with Civil Brand Commission and, their history of being jail inspection commission for 50 years or so, having also gone into Twin Towers in Inman Central Jail with the commissioner and this commission on some inspections. Right now, from what it sounds like, as the elected sheriff and as the sheriff, system change is going to take time. And, I was born and raised here in the county of Los Angeles, and, we have these incidents that are happening in the Antelope Valley. I mean, these were two incidents that were caught on camera, and not to mention the other incidents like go within the schools. And, for me, I'm from a layman's perspective, I'm a therapist, I'm a social worker, and you see these uses of force, and I think residents of LA County, or at least particularly the ones I know, I guess can get troubled by what they're seeing and what the investigations behind that end up happening and continue to favor one outcome over the other. And I think right now with these most recent incidents, I appreciate your comments about public comments, about the two incidents, being disturbing, because it is disturbing. And, I think I'll defend good policing any day. But we continue to see these problems decade after decade. So, my hope is that, you got 4 years and it's just, the amount of employees and changing cultures and changing and getting policies all on board and, to have consistency across, the jail system and, with your command staff and all the way down to the deputy on the street. That takes time. And my hope is, I just hope that, there can be some, and maybe the sheriff's department is working on this, but at least from a public perspective, some transparency where, taxpayers and residents can see shifts in this next 4 years.
Anything else, Sheriff Luna?
Not at this time.
Thank you. We'll go on to the other reports. So the first item is the chair's report. I just have a very quick thing. For the past couple meetings, we have talked about the fatal shooting of Andres Guardado, who was killed by Miguel Vega, a sheriff's deputy who allegedly was a prospect of the deputy gang, the executioners at the Compton station at the time of the killing. At the a couple meetings back, we invited District Attorney George Gascon to come and discuss the memo declining prosecution because it had so many areas of unanswered questions, and the DA declined, as is his right. But they invited us to ask written questions. And we tendered those written questions to the DA's office, and we recently got back a reply. Many of the answers were not really answers, but were an assertion of various legal privileges not to answer this commission's questions about the investigation. The privileges tendered were deliberative process privilege, work product privilege, and other legal mandates not specified. It's really hard to know what to do with a response like that. There is an independent board that DA Gascon constituted early in his tenure to look at controversial police shootings. And I referred all of the materials to that board and asked them to look into it because I'm just not sure there's anything else this commission can do. We are not an oversight body over the DA. I think we have made our concerns known about the investigation of the shooting of Andres Guardado to the sheriff's department. Those folks were not asked if they were in a deputy gang. And, to this day, I guess we just don't have an answer. And while I do respect the legal provisions of confidentiality, Sheriff, over and over again, I just see the narratives where the unions feel free to give their view of the situation in public. And it's just hard for this commission to evaluate anything because we don't have that information. But other than to turn it over to the independent body that the DA instituted with a lot of civil rights lawyers on that board, I don't know what else to do. If any other commissioner has ideas, I'm all ears. In the interest of transparency, I posted this commission's questions as well as the DA's response on the agenda for everyone to see what we know and don't know, what the DA gave us and what they didn't give us. And they didn't give us much.
If I could comment, I would say that.
Yes.
To be charitable, the DA's responses were unsatisfactory as to why they wouldn't reopen or cause the reopening of the Guardado investigation. But you're right. I don't think that we have no oversight with respect to the DA's office. And so that's that's that. It is what it is. And I want to be very respectful here of, sometimes there are issues where this commission needs to maintain some level of confidentiality in terms of actions that are being taken. But I've got to say, I mean, I'm looking at an LA Times article, which indicates, this raises another issue, by the way, but it does indicate, and I don't want to ask the sheriff any questions about this whatsoever. Let me be clear on that. But the LA Times, in an event, is indicating that the State Attorney General's office is looking into the Guardado case, the adequacy of the Sheriff's Department investigation, and whether further investigation with respect to the potential deputy gang connection is warranted. So I just want that for the record. Sean, it's not as if nothing's happened. I think the efforts of this commission, and frankly you personally, have led to at least an examination of that issue, and presumably at some point we might actually be informed what the results of that were, although we may have the same problem with the Attorney General's office that we have with the DA's office. I don't know. I won't anticipate that. In any event, some action is being taken. I just want that to be clear. And again, it's just not appropriate to ask the sheriff directly to comment on that one way or the other.
Sure. There has been reform on the release of information, 1421. This being a police shooting, I just made my own personal request as a professor regarding Miguel Vega and his partner. And the response I got was that no information could be released, notwithstanding that this is non-confidential under 1421, because Mr. Hernandez is appealing his termination to the Civil Service Commission, and therefore Vega is related to Hernandez. Vega's investigation is related to Hernandez, and so I was not given anything. It's just really difficult to get information, even in matters which have deemed to be non-confidential. And I guess that's just a longer discussion that we'll just keep working on.
But that's a point of order here, really, for our commission, and that is, you might make a request as a professor at Loyola Law School, and that's fine. But if we're going to make a request of this commission, we should follow our process as to how that's done, and it's just not individual commissioners deciding to ask for this information or that, because that creates unnecessary burdens. In other words, we have to have a thoughtful process, and I appreciate, Sean, you can do anything you want as a professor at Loyola Law School, but don't complain about it here, because that was not official action of this commission making those requests. If you want us to make those requests, we know we have to follow our process here. Otherwise, every commissioner could be inundating the Sheriff's Department with requests, and we don't want that. That's not appropriate. That's not going to help us perform our function. I'm sorry, we do have a process and an ad hoc committee that can review whether or not we want to make a formal request for information, and we ought to follow that process.
Well, I think that's fair, Rob. The ad hoc did, and we didn't get anything, and that's why, as an individual, I did as well. All right, that's all I have to report, so we'll move on to our executive director's report.
Thank you, Sean. Just wanted to let the community know that we have engaged in some community events recently. On the 24th, we were in South LA at the Florence Library for a community meeting. On June 29th, we hosted a virtual conference on investigation of fatal officer shootings. We had our Vice Chair, Jamon Hicks, to moderate, and we had participation from the District Attorney's Office, the Sheriff's Department, the IG's office, and the County Medical Examiner, Dr. Ukpo. This past Saturday, we were in Pico Rivera for a community meeting where we discussed the MET teams, which we will be talking about today. And if you missed any of those meetings, you can watch the recordings on YouTube or Facebook at LA County COC. Next week, we will be launching an educational virtual conference on deputies in schools. This is being studied by our Quality of Life ad hoc. The first session will be on Thursday, July 27th, where we will be providing background and overview of the topic. The second session will be Monday, July 31st, where we will be talking about balancing safety and equity on school campuses. And the final session will be on Thursday, August 3rd. We have a great lineup of speakers, so we invite you to join us for that. You may have seen that we have a request for public feedback on our website regarding the topic of deputies in schools. And we've received several comments already, more than 100, and we invite you to go to our website and fill out for public comment at coc.lacounty.gov. We are also hosting roundtables, commission staff, or reaching out to local school districts and community members to set up roundtables so we can dig deeper into the matter. Finally, we have our community policing conference that began in 2018. We will hopefully bring that back this October, and we are planning and we'll be giving you more information. You could go to our website for that. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Max, the Inspector General's report is next.
Aside from comments regarding mental evaluation teams and tasers, which I'll hold, I don't have anything to report, but I can answer questions if anybody has any. Our gang investigation is on hold pending the court order, and we're talking to county council about whether or not they intend to appeal that or the negotiation process with the unions. We'll see how that goes. One thing I wanted to add, a number of commissioners here complimented the sheriff just now on his public statements regarding the incidents in the Antelope Valley. I just wanted to confirm for this commission, part of what we do is monitoring, and I can tell you that behind the scenes, the sheriff also, I believe, engaged with his command staff and with even at the deputy level with the department regarding these issues. And so it wasn't just a question of having a press conference. He did take action behind the scenes as well to try to help LASD with the things that we've all been talking about that they are ongoing issues with. So I just want you to know that wasn't just talk as far as I could tell. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Now's the time for any
Before we
commissioner.
go to, I wanted to ask Mr. Huntsman, just to clarify if you can, I mean, is the county going to appeal Judge Chalfont's ruling or not, or do we know yet?
I can't say. It's county council has complete control. I've asked them to appeal. They're talking about it amongst themselves.
All right, thank you.
Max, do you have any comment about the action by the Board of Supervisors that you were present at after a report was solicited of you about the conditions in jails, especially involving temperature, hypothermia, and the failure of the Sheriff's Department to distribute thermal undergarments to incarcerated people there? Do you have any comments for this commission about the proceedings at the BOS or the adequacy or follow-up that might further result from that report?
Well, I think it's an example of kind of what Chair Kennedy was expressing frustration with the process, and Judge Bonner pointed out that there sometimes are ripple effects of what this commission does and what my office does, and I think that's an example of that. So with Bordado, yes, there appears to have been something that happened from that process, even though we weren't satisfied or you weren't satisfied. And it's the same story here. When we wrote that report some months ago, the Sheriff's Department response was lackluster. And I hope we get to a point where the Sheriff's Department, when we issue recommendations, the way it was once under the McDonnell administration was they would usually append to our report a response saying, thank you, and we'll work on that, or this is what we've done. And I hope that's where we get. But in that case, there was no willingness to do the things that the board then took motions about, at least at the lower level, command level. And so I was very happy that the board took action, and I think it shows that the work this commission does and the work that we do eventually percolates even when it's not immediately responded to. So I think it was a very positive thing.
Okay, Max, I'm going to take the log view. Are there any commissioner comments, especially ad hoc committee updates?
Mr. Chair, that is that I think I can speak for the ad hoc committee on deputy gangs and deputy cliques to say that that ad hoc committee will undertake a review of the sheriff's update of the status of the implementation or adoption of the recommendations of the Oversight Commission with respect to deputy gangs and deputy cliques. And we'll follow up as appropriate with the sheriff and with Ms. Decker after that review.
Thank you. And I think we're going to hear about Met later. So unless there's any commissioner comments, I think we have to public comment on item number 2.
Yes, Chair Kennedy, we have 6 people signed up for public comment. Our first speaker is Barbara White, followed by Raquel Derfler, and then Vanessa Perez. If you can please line up behind the microphone, that would be great. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for an opportunity to speak this morning. I'm glad you're here, Sheriff Luna. You know, I'm hoping you'll do some good things. Right now, I'm not sure if you will. I'm not going to jump up and down because you released that tape, because that should be the rule, not the exception. Anytime something happens, this is not new. It's not new in the Antelope Valley. And I'm so glad to know that your deputies, while you were in the car, were on their best behavior. That doesn't happen all the time. And I don't think that you're going to fool us and think that they're doing this all the time. They wouldn't have been under consent decree if they were perfect like you're saying they are. I'm not happy about that. I don't know what you needed to see to think that this deputy was wrong. She had her hands up, holding her phone. She was not a threat. She didn't approach him. He approached her. I am so tired of coming to talk. I'm so tired of writing letters. I'm extremely tired of making phone calls about this, and you're sitting here acting like this is an anomaly. Let me be clear. I'm not anti-police. I'm not anti-sheriff, but I am anti-bad cop, and every good cop should be as well. But how can I tell the difference? If I see something, if I see a police officer doing something wrong and I see another police officer or sheriff watching, does that make him a good cop? If he's not trying to stop it, if he's not trying to stop that from happening. And I am just absolutely tired. I'm absolutely tired of these things happening again and again. And on top of that, when they do something and when you make a settlement, we pay on the backside. So Black people are paying twice. You know, we pay in the street because of the way we're being treated. And like I said, I'm so glad that just like in my office, that the people are really good when the boss is around. I'm so glad that they did that on that day, and I'm not disappointed that they're not different in that respect. But there has to be something done. Why aren't they paying for this? Why aren't they paying for the settlements when they do something wrong? What do we have to do? Why is this continuous? Stop acting like this is an anomaly. Stop acting like it's an anomaly. It's not. This happens daily to Black and brown people. I have a 20-year-old grandson that I'm scared every time he leaves his mother's house. I instruct him to call me. Please call me. I tell him that things are different. When will Black people not have to give the talk anymore? When is that going to happen? Will it happen? You know, will it happen? I'm not sure if it's going to happen or not. I had a few points, but I'm just so upset by all the things that keep going on, and you guys act like it's something brand new. It's not new. It's about as new as water, and water's not new. You know, and that's about how new it is that this happens. Palmdale, Lancaster has always had a problem with the sheriffs. They were good on your day. Maybe you should stay up there more often and go out with them. Maybe it'll keep people from getting hurt. Maybe it'll keep people from getting beat up. Maybe to stop having elderly women with cancer slammed to the ground. That's what we hope for. We don't want anything special. We want it to be treated just like everybody else is being treated. And it's up to you. Like I said, I'm not sure about you right now, but I'm willing to give you a chance, and I hope that you guys do better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, once again. Raquel Derfler from Cancel the Contract. Make the trip from the Antelope Valley so you can put a face to the stories that we tell you. I echo the sentiments of our previous speaker. It was great that the empathy of the sheriffs that day was off the charts. but we know, I know our community bears the brunt of what sheriffs do when no one's watching, even when people are watching. So that's nothing new. As she stated, I know, Sheriff, that you really want to believe that behavior is an outlier, but it's not. It's just what they do to us. And those good cops, they support the bad cops. Because the guy that punched the mother holding her infant in the face, ALAD started a GoFundMe for that gentleman. As of today, it's raised over $36,000. So you have sheriffs contributing, you have deputies contributing. That means they're condoning that behavior. They really feel that they've lost like 2 great deputies. So you know there's a letter circulating from just a deputy, right? It's pretty much a pity party. I don't understand why we have to understand the stress that the abuser is under. It's like in domestic violence. I don't need to know why you're punching me in the face. I just know you're doing it. I don't need to feel for you. The deputies, they signed up for that job. They were not drafted. They were not conscripted into an army. They signed up for that. My community didn't sign up for being punched in the face or thrown to the ground. Want to reiterate, the woman that was punched in the face, she was holding her infant. What Black mother is going to hand her infant over to someone from an agency that harms and kills her community? That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Vanessa Perez. I'm the mother of Joseph Andrew Perez, who was beat by Los Angeles County sheriffs. I want to say thank God that those sheriffs had those dash cams where we could see what they really did. They punched that woman twice holding a baby. Yet, coming back to my son Joseph, he was punched over 100 times by your deputies. And that wasn't caught on camera. And how convenient that wasn't there. Second, I want to say, Cerise let go of, released a list of deputies that had prior shootings, and Deputy Sean Merrick, who beat Joseph, he was on there. Deputy Adam Nelson, he was on there. And then, of course, Chief Bobby Watch, who was at the meeting in Compton, was there going to present to speak in front of the families or do something there. I don't know what he was going to do there. But it's the lack of background checks that you guys are doing and bringing them to the families when they've already impacted us greatly. And then I want to say Captain Rick Rector, he was on Cerise's list as well. And Captain Rick Rector supported Paul Saldana, Deputy Paul Saldana at court. So when we would go to court for my daughter's restraining order, as she begged the judge to grant the restraining order to have Paul Saldana leave the school, Captain Rick Rector was there supporting Paul Saldana and saying he's a good deputy, and yet Rick Rector has a prior shooting as well. He's on Cerise's list as well. It's a never-ending cycle if you don't take these problematic deputies out of here. I mean, I know it's a new administration. I think you're doing something different than Villanueva, but yet the same men from Villanueva are still under your department.
Thank you, Ms. Perez. Your time has expired. Our next speaker is Michelle Infante, followed by William Brown and Sofia Quiñones.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Sheriff Luna. Well, I think I'm gonna have to start off by a comment that you made or a statement that you made when you said that 99% of your officers, are good and 1%, you alluded to the fact that's bad, but that's the furthest thing from the truth, and I think you know that. And if you don't, then I think that you're kidding yourself or hiding behind something, because your department is a big threat to Black and brown people. They're dying. They're not losing their lives and not being found. They're dying, okay? I'm up here this morning to support Vanessa Perez, Joseph Perez, because there's no reason why you can't open an investigation and ask the OIG's office to do it, and you could do it yourself. The anomaly, like she said, there's no anomaly here. She just got up and spoke about some people, and I'm up here talking about somebody who's been beaten, almost beaten to death, with photographs, and I know that you've received them. And I know that nobody has done anything about this. How can 12 people on this list and someone who has a broken eye socket and tons of sutures in their head go in your department and your department have no paperwork on what that person looked like when they went in there prior, and you guys were the ones that beat him up? I don't know what else you would need to do an investigation. You know your department has a problem. Every day it's thrown in your face. I can imagine what it must be like to be in your position. But the thing is here, you intentionally took this position. And so now you have all these families out here whose lives are ruined and are waiting for you to do something and to show up for them. And so while I'm here today and while you're sitting there in that seat in front of all these people, I'm going to ask you to please do your job. And I'm going to hand over this paper here with 12 people on it, and you cannot tell me that off of this list, there isn't one person that's in here that has done their job correctly.
Thank you,
So
Ms.
I would
Infante. Your
appreciate,
time has
I'm not
expired.
done yet. I would appreciate it if you
Ms.
would take
Infante,
this
your time has
paper.
expired. We're going to have to give you a warning if you're not going to abide by our code of conduct. Ms. Infante, you're taking up the other community members' time.
She's done.
Our next speaker, William Brown.
I just had a couple quick questions. One is regarding the disturbing non-response of DA Gascon. I'm just wondering for the community here in Los Angeles, I appreciate a state body is investigating that, but we can feel the tension of the community with these issues. And I'm wondering if there's some part of LA County's electoral structure itself that can be requested to subpoena the DA to respond to these questions. I know this body can't, but it would certainly, I think, serve the community to feel that within LA County, there's a way to address issues like a DA that refuses to respond to this kind of issue. And I don't know where it would be, but I just raised that issue. Secondly, I interviewed a family of somebody who was shot and killed by the deputies in East LA. A disturbing issue arose in my interview with them. The officer that appeared at the scene of the shooting that then wrote the report of what occurred at the shooting has been identified by a community newspaper that tracks which deputies are involved in which gangs within the deputy department. And it's kind of available to the community through this local newspaper. And everybody knows that. And they refer to the community and say, is this officer part of a gang or not? The person that wrote the overall report of that killing has been identified as a member of a gang. I think as this case goes forward, and as I understood from the family, they've been offered $10 million already to settle this case because the killing was so awful. And they didn't accept that because their lawyer said, ask for more.
Sir, thank you for your comment. Your time has expired.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sofia Quiñones.
Good morning. I was listening to LA County Board of Supervisors meeting, and so when they brought up about the thermals, I was very disturbed. So thank you for dealing with that issue. But not only the cold, when the heat's coming, let's see if we can deal with making sure people are cool. And just some background, I'm from East Los Angeles and had to live with the issues surrounding these gang members within our police department, and it's very disturbing. So I hope we together can have a town hall with the sheriff because the families need you. They want to know that you support them, and so that we can try and bring the community together. And I also fear for the officers and the retaliation that they will receive. And we don't want any officer not being covered because there's a dispute within the sheriff's department. All lives matter, you know, and the safety of our officers is also important. So we want to make sure that they're covered and that there are two officers in the unit. I also want to talk about violence against women and the missing and murdered women on the east side and the lack of detectives within robbery and homicide. I think that's very important, even though we have an issue of budgeting. There are missing and murdered women, and the families need closure, and we need to find who is killing them. And there's a pattern. And so we hope that as you look into reorganizing and focusing on the sheriff's budget and demands, that we focus on the investigation of our missing and murdered women. And in closing, the images were disturbing, have been disturbing when we see violence, and it's unacceptable. So we hope that together we can bring healing because our nation is going to be dealing with a lot of things. Everyone's on strike. We're dealing with inflation. It's going to be a hot summer. Let's try and keep it calm, but nothing erupts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinones. Our next speaker is O. Francis.
LAPD's recent violent acts against Black community members in the Antelope Valley are indicative of LASD's violent and racist history in the AV. LASD has targeted Black residents of the AV for decades. LASD remains under a consent decree in the AV for the targeting of Black residents with Section 8 vouchers to deter them from settling in the AV. Despite the consent decree, they target Black children in their schools, they target Black unhoused children and displace them. They target Black community members at the grocery shop or on the drive home from work. These most recent acts of hate do not exist in a vacuum. It's not random and it's not new. They serve as examples of the abuses that Black residents in the AV face on a regular basis. Both Palmdale and Lancaster stations are known to be occupied by 2 deputy gangs. Stations with deputy gangs are statistically the most violent stations and target community members. The 6 stations are known to have active deputy gangs. Active deputy gangs account for nearly half of all deputy-involved shootings. The AV is all too familiar with violence against Black residents. I'm glad the deputies involved in these 2 incidents have been dismissed, but it is not enough. Given LASD's continuous abuses of Black residents in the AV, even while under consent decree, confirm that LASD's contract with the AV must be canceled. Cancel the contract. The response of LASD's deputies to the 2 brutal beatings of Black women in the AV has been deeply disturbing. A letter submitted by an anonymous deputy attempts to write off the abusive and racist policing tactics deployed on a senior couple at a Winco, and it simply acts of an overworked and understaffed department. You don't need any more cops. We didn't need them in the first place. There was a GoFundMe set up for a deputy who punched a Black mother in the face, and they've raised over $36,000, like folks have already said. The comments on this that are supportive condemn the decision to discipline and dismiss this deputy and support him as part of the Brotherhood and the Thin Blue Line, which we know has been banned and not forced. Cancel the
Ms.
contract.
Francis.
Thank you.
Chair Kennedy, that's all the in-person comments that we have. We do have one online. Tamara, we have 2. One, Tamara, you're up.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so the civilian oversight these meetings shouldn't be a PR campaign for the sheriff. There's a reason why the FBI is investigating y'all. And it's a shame that it took y'all to literally get caught beating Black and brown folks for there to be an investigation. And make no mistake, this is nothing new within the department. There's known deputy gangs for over 50 years. There's no changing the culture. There's no amount of money or training that can fix the culture. It's deeply embedded in it because it's systemic. Okay? So for y'all to get on here and talk about, you had a ride along in the Antelope Valley and they were doing perfectly fine is unacceptable. When you have a Black woman being punched by a deputy with a child, an infant in her arms, is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. A Black woman is filming you all while arresting her partner and then her being knocked to the ground and being punched. Okay, this is 50 years or more in the making. We all know the culture is violence, right, against Black and brown folks. Cancel the contract. These deputies cannot just be fired, they need to be prosecuted. In the case of Andres Guardado, the DA, that's unacceptable. In the case of Anthony Vargas, y'all wouldn't even allow, the judicial wouldn't allow the fact that these were gang members to be brought up in the case. So it's systemic. Everybody is complicit.
Thank you for your comment, Tamara. Our final speaker is Ali Rubenfeld.
Hello. Like the other speaker, I'd like to place the recent actions of LASD and the Antelope Valley into context and just correct the idea that this is the exception and not the rule. In 2006, during the recession, there was a movement of Black residents to the Antelope Valley with Section 8 vouchers, and LASD engaged in an active campaign to both actively evict them and remove them in collusion with the city. These are the actions that earned them the consent decree that they are still under today. Currently, these deputies have been documented pushing Black residents who are unhoused into the desert, which is ostensibly a death sentence in that region. And then we hear from AV residents at these meetings testify that their children have been thrown to the ground or handcuffed by deputies at their schools. After these two most recent beatings of Black women by AV deputies, instead of condemning the actions of violence, deputies in the AVs have authored letters attempting to write off these brutalizations as actions of overworked deputies and have raised over $36,000 for a deputy who punched a Black mother, commenting things like thin blue line and brotherhood. These are not the actions of bad apples. These beatings are emblematic of the culture and racism and violence that is entrenched within LASD and has enabled deputy gangs in these stations, including, which we know, well documented, the Cowboys and the Rattlesnakes. These actions of violence are part of a long history of racist policing and government neglect in the Antelope Valley that the contract must be canceled. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it?
Yes, that's it. That's all the public comments on
All
this
right.
item.
We're going to take one final item before our 15-minute break. We have the matter of an election. I think that our current terms are up today, so we need to have an election. I think the last time we met, we had nominations for myself and Jamone Hicks, and we were missing some people. So I just wanted to make sure that there weren't others maybe who might want to run. If there's any nominations, if not, I think we can go ahead and Danielle, you want to give me advice how we conduct this?
I move that we elect Sean Kennedy as the chair for a second term of the Civilian Oversight Commission. Do I have a second?
I second.
So I think we already have the motions in, and so I think Eric is just going to go ahead and take the votes on each of them unless anyone wanted to be heard about another motion for anyone. Hearing none, Eric, you can go ahead and move forward with the.
Sure, thank you. So yes, we have one person nominated for the position of chair, Sean Kennedy. I will take the roll.
Eric, I think we need public comment first, actually.
Okay, there's no one has signed up for public comment.
Okay, move on.
So I will take the roll for the election of chair, Sean Kennedy. Commissioner Bonner.
Aye.
Commissioner Higgins Cooper.
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia. Commissioner Giggins.
Super aye.
Commissioner Harris.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
And Chair Kennedy.
I'm going to abstain.
Thank you. I think the ayes have it, Chair Kennedy. So you will be the chair for another year.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Sean.
I really appreciate your confidence in me friends, and I will try to live up to your the example that prior chairs have set for me. And now we have our vice chair.
Yes, should I go ahead with the vote for the vice chair as well?
Well, let us have a motion. I move that Jamon Hicks be elected the vice chair of the Civilian Oversight Commission. Do I have a second?
I second it.
All right, now call the roll. Eric?
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. So we have no public comment either. Commissioner Bonner,
Aye.
Commissioner Higgins Cooper,
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia,
Aye.
Commissioner Giggins,
Aye.
Commissioner Harris,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Chair Kennedy.
Aye.
It appears that the continuing vice chair is Jamon Hicks. The ayes have it.
We're going to take a 15-minute break. I want to thank Sheriff Luna for attending. I really appreciate all your engagement with us, and we'll resume in 15 minutes.
Okay, we are right at about 10:35, so we're going to try to resume the meeting. If folks in the room can head back to their seats, that would be helpful. And for those online, we'll get started shortly. Thank you.
What was that sigh?
Hello, everyone. If you can please find your seats where the meeting's about to resume. Thank you. Chair Kennedy, please.
At what point do we have to discuss that?
Okay, friends, we're gonna take up.
Got it.
We're going to take up the matter of Met many years ago. This commission recommended expanding Met teams in the department to respond to people struggling with a mental health crisis. I think I speak for the Met ad hoc members when I say we made that recommendation, because specially trained deputies and clinicians responding to calls of people in crisis, they don't shoot anyone. And while that's not a perfect solution, it's certainly a better approach than having families who call. The 911 for help with someone when they're, in a crisis. And then the deputies come and shoot their loved one. And the guilt and the shame that the folks suffer from that, even though they've done nothing wrong, is it's just so terrible. So this conversation about med, it's an important one. And we're really happy to have people here, our speakers that we've asked for an update on where the Met teams are and where they're going. We have Miriam Brown, who's the Deputy Director of the Department of Mental Health Emergency Outreach and Triage Division. And we have folks from the Sheriff's Department who lead Met teams, including Jeffrey Diedrich. And we have Mark Gale, who is Criminal Justice Chair of the Greater LA National Alliance on Mental Illness, commonly called NAMI. And we are very grateful to have NAMI here today to talk to us as well. So if we could hear from Miriam and the other speakers, then we will take comments from the commission.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here with you.
Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you. In terms of the mental evaluation teams, our goal with Department of Mental Health is to continue to bring staff on board. However, one of the major challenges we are experiencing, it's the national shortage of clinicians who want to do field work. Prior to 2020, I have to say that there were clinicians online. They always wanted to do this work, wanted to work whether the co-response model or our mobile response teams. After the pandemic, we are experiencing a lot of challenges. We have lost a lot of clinicians, not only to outside the department, but they have relocated to other states. Given their experience, they're really, high commodity everywhere. The department has been working on two things. One, we have implemented the alternative crisis response, where we're really looking at increasing the number of mobile crisis teams led by civilians. So one of the things that we're also doing is, given that the Department of Mental Health is not able to hire the clinicians within the Department of Mental Health, we have put a solicitation. We have providers that have come on board to help us out to see if, through the private sector, we can bring additional clinicians. Unfortunately, they are facing the same situation. We have two providers that have been on board. Contracts have been signed. We have Sycamores serving the different parts of LA County. We have Vista Del Mar. They all have experience doing crisis work. But again, the same problem, the inability to hire clinicians. The other problem that we experience is hiring clinicians to work after hours. We have clinicians that are willing to work during the day, traditional hours, Monday through Friday, but when it comes down to the other aspects, late shift, night shifts, weekend shifts, we do have a lot of problems. Now, in terms of the mental evaluation teams, Sheriff is only one of the entities that we work with. We do have a collaborative with about 40 police departments. Unfortunately, we are having the same difficulties across the board. With the Sheriff's Med, we do have our 33 teams. We haven't been able to move from that. We do have our 4 clinicians for the triage desk. We have our 4 clinicians for the RAM, the Risk Assessment Management Program. And then we have our administrative staff. We do have vacancies and we continue to lose staff. And they tell me it's not about the hours, because we just recently lost a clinician that was working in North County for the PM shift. We offered her a day shift. She declined. She said it was not about the job. She loves the job and eventually would like to come back. But at this point, she is doing something else with her career and her personal life, something that will meet both her needs. What have we done? The Department of Mental Health, the Board of Supervisors directed the Department of Mental Health on April 4 to create incentives to attract more clinicians to do field work, both for the mobile crisis teams and for the law enforcement team, in this case, a mental evaluation team with LASD. We're still working on that. We are working in creating the following sign-on bonus for new clinicians that are coming on board, retention bonus for current clinicians that are with us. We did create a field assignment bonus for individuals doing crisis work and responding to calls in the community. Now we're looking at increasing that bonus as well. The department is also looking at increasing the differentials. For those who work weekends, nights, evening shifts, we do have differentials that we pay for clinicians that work those shifts. We're looking into increasing those differentials as well. I believe that we're very close. As you all know, there has to be a lot of negotiation, we look into the budget, and we need to look into all the aspects. But we're hoping that that will be approved pretty soon. As we speak, we are doing hiring first. We're working with schools. We're going everywhere to try to attract clinicians to do field work. But needless to say, it has been a challenge across the board. That's something that I have been doing this work, crisis work, for over 15 years. I never saw that. We always have people wanting to do this work, coming to do this work, particularly with law enforcement. And we have waiting lists. Today, we have called psychiatric social workers, marriage family therapists, psychologists, nurses, licensed technicians, and more often than not, they decline the jobs, especially Wednesday through Sunday, 3 p.m. to 2:30 a.m. And that's not on you. That's not just to LASD Med. We experience the same thing with the SMART team and other programs that have those hours. We're having the same experience even with daytime operations. It's very difficult to hire clinicians who want to do the field work, be in the field. The reason why, because clinicians, there's a high demand out there, and there's a lot of places that are offering them 100% telework. Telepsych has become something that it's a commodity. So clinicians have opted to do a lot of telepsych, telework, being in the comfort of their homes, and really adjust their schedule to their family needs. Thank you.
Thank you. I think next we have Captain Diedrich
Can we ask questions?
at the end.
Oh, yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. We do have a small PowerPoint. And in short, I think the PowerPoint will be very brief. I'm here more to make sure I address all your questions and concerns, but you can go ahead to the first slide. So as you know, the MET team is a co-response team which partners the deputy sheriff with a mental health clinician. Go ahead. And back, I don't know the entire history, but back when the pilot started in 91, it showed there was value. And then in 93, it started to grow. And in 1996, there were 5 teams. I believe the team came before you in the past. And it was 23 teams. As we sit today, we're at 34, actually 35. And the goal was to be at 60. We have lofty goals with getting there, but I think we'll be discussing that with you here in a minute. Go ahead. I think one of the large values that came out of the collaboration, not only with this body, but with other people, was the 24/7 triage desk. So now our department has this 24/7. It's staffed by a trained deputy sheriff for 24 hours, 365. And a clinician is there from 0600 to 02. What this does is, even at a time that maybe a MET team is not available, a deputy sheriff in the field has access to information. They have access to, maybe a procedure, maybe a location where someone could be taken. They're not left alone now. So by using this 24/7 staff triage desk, it gives them an option. And what happens when the clinician is there, it also gives the deputy a licensed clinician's point of view. And so it's really enhanced our community response. It also helps with our contact with the hospitals and the other facilities because the person on the other line knows what they're talking about. Sometimes we in law enforcement, we may not speak the right language, but these do. And so that connection saves hours out in the field. Go ahead. We have a large region, as you know, for LA County, and back in 2016, the response time was 50 minutes plus. Go ahead. And it's been shortened now to 29.5. When I looked at this, I was still thinking that was too large, and actually in the past it had gone down even lower, but due to some of the geographic locations and giving an honest assessment of response times, that's why it's 29.5. We actually had it down under 20 for a period of time, but geographically, when you factor in all the calls, an honest assessment is the 29.5. Go ahead. One of the very instrumental components of MET is the RAMP team. It's our risk assessment management program. And this team is basically an investigative team where deputies, not in addition to MET, they have additional skills. And they're looking at the chronic and high utilizers. And they have a threat scale 1 through 5 where they code certain issues. And then when things rise to a certain level, it becomes like an investigative case where it's wraparound services, intense case management for those people in our communities that need those kind of services. And I think we'll be talking more about what RAMP can provide and the benefits of RAMP, especially with the current climate. Go ahead. It's a little more about RAMP, and I think one of the things was originally 1,365 people back in 2018 were considered high risk. And so when we have that quantity of people that are in that category, it yells loudly for the need for a RAMP program and even its expansion. Go ahead. If you look here, when you use this crisis stabilization team, and we only have 6, and so they were able to address 12% of the MET calls. And we would like to see that number go up in the near future. But it just showed that with especially coming out of the pandemic and all the challenges that presented, is that we have an increased obligation for our services, but at this time we're at 12%. Go ahead. One of the things that happened in the past was an inmate booking diversion pilot program, and it's being revisited today. And I think that it has tremendous upside to this program, especially as we look at diverting those away from jails. And we're in current discussions with looking at how this program could go forward. But basically having RAMP engaged with those people and diverting them, I think could be a very big positive in this field, especially given that the cases are getting referred from the stations. So once RAMP is able to address that problem, it's freeing up resources at that station to serve the community in other ways. And I think if you look at the inmate booking diversion pilot, going forward, I think if we wrap our arms around this situation, that we can have a significant impact on our jail population. Go ahead. Our training, our crisis intervention training and de-escalation training is quite comprehensive. And I'll get into this probably with your questions. However, we were very lucky that Sheriff Luna met with our teams and visited our units early on in his tenure. And one of the things that he talked about was the emphasis of training. And I'll just go into now what I was probably going to tell you during the question and answer, is he explained how important this kind of training is, how we need to have a strategic plan. So immediately his executive leadership team has already made a strategic committee, bringing all of our factions of training on the department together and having an emphasis on this mental health training, equivalent to some of the tactical training that we had in the past. That multi-year training program, which will be, when it comes to this subject matter, will be taught by our MET personnel, along with our clinical psychologists and our psychologists from our Psychological Services Bureau. And I'll touch on it later, but to me, it's the best training I've seen in my 32 years on the department. And I think this new emphasis on that training will have amazing results. As we sit now, we have many classes that were developed maybe from some of your recommendations that we'll talk about, where we have a dispatcher course. One of the things that we found is someone in the community calls a station and maybe the person on the other line really doesn't know what to ask when it relates to mental health. You know, there's certain questions. So we created a course for that. And that's all part of this now. So the training and the leadership that we have and the support that we have is unique. And I think it's gonna really help the department in the future. Go ahead. This it shows the training that a Met deputy has compared to what our patrol, and it's quite expansive. And you see the longer a deputy is at the Met Bureau, the more training they get. And part of that is simply in the co-response model. What you'll find is when you pair a deputy and a clinician, they semi-morph into each other. The deputy sheriff gets an insight and knowledge and experience that they didn't have before. And the clinician maybe sees law enforcement from a different view because they're in the car with that person. They see the challenges, they see the struggles, they see the successes, and they see the failures. And so when you put these two people in the same car, they start to impact each other. And what you have is a deputy sheriff with training that they would have never had before because they're in that car every shift with a clinician. Go ahead. Public relations. Met is currently under my command at Community Partnerships Bureau. I'm very much a champion of the co-response model as I created our Sheriff's Homeless Outreach Services team myself, which is a co-response model. So I've been involved in this for 10 years. And I truly believe the essence of community policing is we should be a non-issue. We should be part of the community. And the things that we do at Community Partnerships Bureau are those things, is we'll enhance our relationships with the community. We go to community events. We attend everything we're invited to. COVID did mess things up. And as we come out of it, matter of fact, we had a staff meeting the other day that talked about we're getting out of our cars and walking the neighborhoods and walking and meeting the business owners and talking to people and getting back to that community policing model. That's what made us special. And so Met being at Community Partnerships Bureau and the outreach that the Met team has done, they attend seminars, conferences, community events. It's nonstop. The only thing that's restricting us is our staffing, but our community engagement is our number one priority. Go ahead. We also have what's called our Veterans Mental Health Team. And it was created in 2020. The Board of Supervisors approved it. And that's been a really ideal situation to have veteran deputy sheriffs, who are veterans, obviously, interacting with our veteran population. So the creation of that team was an amazing thing for our veterans in the community, because we do know we have a significant veteran population who are homeless. Go ahead. Homeless outreach. Because we are all in the same bureau under community partnerships, the LA County Sheriff's Homeless Outreach Services team partners with our Met team, and we proactively engage those experiencing homelessness in the community. The way the host team does it and the way the Met team is with compassion and dignity. And we've never used force in any of our contacts. And it goes back to some of the training and just selecting the right people and having the right mission. And it really is a positive thing to see when you see this compassionate engagement combining these two disciplines together, because quite often those experiencing homelessness suffer from a mental health issue. And so we recognize that, and partnering us together has really provided some strong community relations. Go ahead. Just some pictures of in the field. One of the things that we'll talk about is the Met team does not drive black and white police cars. They drive patient-centric vehicles. They're white. They don't have all the markings of a police car. So if we do or find ourselves in a situation we are transporting a patient, they're not going in a black and white with a cage. They're going with a white patient-centric vehicle. So when we're in the field, it does have a different look. Go ahead. Oh, there you go. I was ahead of myself. They do have the lights and siren in case because they are sworn deputy sheriffs. But as you see, the vehicle with those lights are off, it's just a white car. And so that hopefully reduces stigma when we are involved and we are transporting someone. And it's something that we're cognizant of. Go ahead. The training, which I'll address your questions. Like I said, in my 32 years, the crisis training that I've seen is the best in the country. I've been privileged to travel with Dr. Pietro D'Angelo from our Psychological Services Bureau to travel across the country recently, teaching some of the things that we'll talk about, which is one of the ROAR models. And under the sheriff's leadership, we've integrated, which is coming soon, another model, which is called ICAT. which is going to be partnering with our ROAR training to really give deputies this crisis intervention training. And another thing is, trying to see if the picture shown is, the City of Industry graciously donated a training trailer. So it's a small building. It has multiple classrooms. So we now have our own facility to host training. We've already hosted people from other states that have come to take this training, and also within our department. So for our training staff, also going along with the sheriff's multi-year strategic plan for training, we now have our own facility to conduct it in. So we erase any barriers there that might have occurred before. Go ahead. I think that's it for the PowerPoint. Any questions, sir?
We're going to take questions at the end.
Yeah, oh, yes, sir. I apologize.
No, not at all. Thank you for the presentation. And now we have Mr. Gale from NAMI.
Good morning, and thank you for having me today. So my presentation will be real brief. I was asked to speak sort of on alternative crisis response in general, but I do have a few specific points for the Sheriff's Department. Next slide, please. So for those in the room who are unfamiliar with the different types of crisis response we have in the county, I'm going to divide them into two broad sections. One is 911, which of course goes to law enforcement, crisis intervention teams, trained officers and deputies for both police and sheriff's department. Then there's co-response, which is one officer and one clinician. And in regard to CIT, very different for sheriff deputies. It's my understanding in the unincorporated areas of the county, oftentimes the deputy rides alone. So there is no backup, there is no med team, there is nobody to call. It's that deputy and the person they may come across who's in crisis. So I think it's extremely important. All patrol deputies get trained in crisis intervention team training or a like training such as ROAR. Co-response is one officer and one clinician. I think these are tremendous additions to helping with reduce excessive use of force against people with serious mental illness. And we found out today, I thought it had 33 teams. Apparently that's now 35. SMART for LAPD has 12 to 14 teams. And I want to echo Miriam Brown's very detailed presentation. And thank you, Miriam, for highlighting the difficulties. At the NAMI walk, I sat with SMART officers, from LAPD at their tent. They always come and support our walk, as did Sheriff Luna. And they have financing right now to add 16 teams. They have not had one clinician apply for the job. So SMART could put 16 more, and there's this anecdotal, I got it from the guys who work on the teams, but apparently they've got capacity to expand and they can't hire anybody. Then you get to the non-law enforcement response, which would be our new 988 crisis line or the DMH access line, which has been in place for years, which gets you to PMRT, psychiatric mobile response teams. There are 33 teams countywide, 2 clinicians, and no officer. So no police officer, no guns. However, the response time is 4 to 5 hours. And I have some questions about the med team response time being approximately 30 minutes. Anecdotally, I hear from families it's much longer than that. So averages can be, I think sometimes, will obscure the facts, but I'd be curious to know how many, 2 and 3 and 4 hour response times there are, because it's impossible to get to everybody in 30 minutes with 33 teams. And then I'm frustrated with the mobile crisis outreach teams, or what we call MCOT, which are community-based. We had 2 teams. I understand it's expanded to maybe 5 or 6. These are like social workers and peer support, if I'm not mistaken. We've been talking about this for years, and we still only have single-digit number of teams. And we've talked a lot about, and many papers have been written about peer support specialists, trained peers, somebody with a lived experience of having a serious mental illness who's been appropriately trained for crisis work. As an advocate, I'm very frustrated to see the lack of expansion and the lack of scale. Next slide, please. Because, and I will get to the unintended consequences of that. Oop, go back one. Or let's see. Okay, next slide. Yeah, right. So expansion challenges. Miriam addressed this. COVID changed everything. So the expansion of mental health telehealth, a lot of clinicians can now work from home and possibly make more money working from home as a psychologist. Hiring for field work has become more challenging. I don't have to repeat, Miriam's given you all the details. The need for additional incentives is there to increase hiring, and to the Department of Mental Health's credit, they're doing that. It's still difficult. There's one issue that no one ever wants to talk about, but you keep reading about it in occasional newspaper articles. But when you talk to people who do this work for a living, they're concerned about it. That's workforce safety. We must keep our clinical workforce safe. So if you're going to send a social worker and a peer, or two peers, or even two mental health clinicians into encampments or out in the field at 3 a.m, they've got to feel safe. I think it's a significant impediment to hiring. We don't talk about it enough. We don't, and I'm not sure if we are developing protocols. Obviously, we probably can't afford to hire private security staff to keep our social workers safe. Next slide, please. But I think it's a really important issue. And you read about some awful things that are happening to mental health workforce around, different cities in California. So what is our plan to increase workforce safety in the field for our mental health clinicians who are willing to do these jobs? The expectations of the mental health workforce expansion aren't being met. We've talked about the resistance to hiring. And the other thing that wasn't said this morning is we're hiring people, but we're also have attrition of clinical staff, makes it difficult to meet the expansion goals. So if you hire 125 people in 1 month, if you lose another 50 or 60 to attrition, and I don't know what the real numbers are, DMH could give you those, but that makes it real hard to make progress. We all want a larger community-based non-law enforcement response to mental health crisis. It's what we say. We write papers, Board of Supervisors create authorizations. But if significant expansion is in reality years away, let's take off the rose-colored glasses and say, how should we really be adjusting our planning? Because the unintended consequences of the expansion slowdown, or very little expansion at all, is that the default response to mental health crisis in the field is going to continue to be law enforcement, which brings me to my final point. We say as a county, what law enforcement says, what the community says, what stakeholders like myself say, is we want more and more non-law enforcement responses to people in crisis who haven't committed crimes and where there's no aggression or violence, and a law enforcement officer isn't necessary for public safety. But I see a reduced commitment to crisis intervention team training, both at the Sheriff's Department and the independent police departments in our county. LAPD continues to do 2 trainings a month, as they always have at their academy. So here's some NAMI figures. LASD Patrol scheduled 12 trainings. By the way, we do 2 hours of CIT training. We've been part of CIT training since 1988. At one point, our Los Angeles CIT presentations, we were part of the largest CIT expansion in the nation. And we have presented to over 8,000 sworn officers. And we diligently prepare our presenters to do relevant personal testimony to law enforcement. Patrol scheduled 12 trainings for NAMI. 5 were canceled. We've done 7 through June. Same number, 7 presentations for Divert through June, and none were canceled. So I don't think that's enough. I was on a past Investment and Mental Health Committee meeting for the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department that developed all these trainings years ago. We were going to try to train 300 to 500 patrol officers a year. 7 presentations don't even get close. We've been really disturbed about it, and we have not been invited in to the ROAR presentations. We don't know why, since I realized that other groups that deal with people with disabilities are also making presentations to ROAR, but there is no disability that has more encounters with law enforcement than serious mental illness. For us not to be part of the ROAR trainings is ridiculous. I've said this to the previous sheriff, and we've talked about it with Sheriff Luna. We met with him only about a week ago. He hasn't had time to come back to us yet with and address our concerns, but I know we'll be hearing from him very shortly. We're the human face of mental illness. When we come in, when our presenters present, it is what the deputies remember. They don't remember PowerPoints, they remember us, the family members and the peers who talked to them about their encounters with law enforcement and what that was like, whether the outcome was positive or negative. Last slide, please. So we think, I'm very concerned about that. The independent police departments we used to do, I realize that's not the purview of this commission, but it speaks to what I consider a reduced commitment to CIT training in our county. I think it's disappointing. And the longer it takes the Department of Mental Health to be able to hire clinicians, the longer law enforcement remains the default. And if law enforcement remains the default, common sense tells you we need to do more training. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Okay, Patty.
Yeah, I have to leave, unfortunately, so I wanted to just speak first about how so much appreciate this update and you being take the rose-colored glasses off of the challenges. But I do want to say that the commitment that both your departments still maintain in supporting MET is very heartening. And I know the challenges are huge, and they're not of your doing. But I just want to say that looking back at the work that this commission has been able to do, I think we could be most proud of the work that we've done with MET, along with the Family Assistance Program. But the work the collaboration that the department and Community Mental Health, Department of Mental Health, and with our commission has done to get that increase from the 20 to the 33 or 34 MET teams. And that you haven't moved the needle on that, but that was huge when we were able to make that happen. And that's because we kept up the dialogue, we kept up the connection, this commission kept up the support for increasing MET. Now we're trying to be more creative and meet some of the demands and the new ideas of the times with more civilian involvement, more community involvement, and so we could have a possibility of a variety of responses depending on the severity of the calls, actually, and also, again, the training. We also have to get to the place that every patrol person is skillful at de-escalation. We have to get there. We're not there yet. So I'm a fan of MET. We can't get rid of the co-response team, as challenging as it is, while we add these different creative community response teams also. And I'm looking forward to see how creative we can be and how good the training will be and what the results. But the fact that everybody is thinking about this together, I think is really important. But I just hope that our commission does not falter in supporting Met going forward. And I want to thank you for all the work that you are doing, the leadership that you both have provided and are continuing to provide. Because I know that we as a commission, we have not had an argument about Met. We have supported Met, even though there's, concerns. But I just want to appreciate everybody, and I appreciate this commission. I think this is some of the best work we've done.
I have a question, maybe a comment first of all, and that is to note the really not to pat ourselves on the back here too much, but I mean the great work of Patty Gagans as the chair of the ad hoc committee on the Met Teams issue and moving that forward. It certainly is one of the important achievements of this Oversight Commission, and as well as family assistance. By the way, I would add body worn cameras. We were very supportive, and I think ultimately instrumental in getting body worn cameras rolled out. And by the way, could include our work on deputy gangs and some other things. But having said that, I think it illustrates something that Chair Kennedy started off with, and that was, what is the role of this commission? And when you get right down to it, our role is to recommend and facilitate needed reforms in the sheriff's department through essentially policy, training, and discipline. Right? I mean, that's what this is what we're about. We're not about investigating. We have no investigative power of individual cases and so on. Anyway, so having said that, I do have a question for Captain Dietrich, and that is, and also for Ms. Brown. We're right now at 35 Met teams. The goal that we stated, I think, and recommended to the Sheriff's Department several years ago was 60. So the question would be a couple of questions. One, if we were able to get to 60, Captain Dietrich, would that cut down the response times? And would it, in other words, would it aid in getting Met teams rolled out more quickly to a situation in which you have a seriously mentally ill person that potentially could result in, by the way, the loss of that person's life or perhaps somebody else's life? And if that's true, I have a secondary question. This is probably for Ms. Brown as well. And that is the constriction to getting to 60, is that a budgetary constriction? If it is there a request in the budget to increase the number? And by the way, when I say the budget, not just the Sheriff's Department, the Department of Mental Health, or is the constriction, as we just heard, not about budget, but it's about the inability to essentially expand the number of mental health clinicians in the Department of Mental Health because of the safety issue? I don't know. I'd like to, anyway, get a response from you and perhaps from Ms. Brown too on that latter issue. So would it be effective? Is it a budget issue, or is it some other issue in terms of hiring by the Department of Mental Health?
So to answer your first question, the answer is yes. It will definitely help. Having those additional deputies and Met teams available to serve the community, yes, it would help. I do believe that both of our departments, as I understand, I don't believe it's a budgetary issue. I believe it's the significant staff shortages. I think in my 32 years, I don't think we've ever been where we are today. And so I do, especially when we have the leadership of the sheriff. The sheriff has said this is a priority for him. And so I think as we look at our global staffing shortages, until those are addressed, I'm not sure. So I do know that that's our issue. I do want to clear something up because in our year-end report, I did place that there was over 1,300 calls that Met was unable to respond to. And when I heard Mr. Gale speak, it's important that I'm transparent with you. It's in our year-end report that we submitted to you that there were calls that we were unable to go to just because we couldn't. And so that may be something that he was referring to with response times, but there were calls we never got to. And so I wanted to clear that up because transparency to me is important.
Is the global problem with, let's say, staffing in the Sheriff's Department, just numbers of deputy, is that a budget issue, or is that an issue that is simply there's just too much attrition in terms of hiring and training and so forth. By the way, you may not be the right person to ask that question to.
You
I'm
saw me
guessing.
glance that way.
And I don't see the sheriff here. By the way, could we, if we have a response to that, it would be helpful, but I don't need to have it right now, but I'd like to have an understanding, because if it's a budget issue, we want to assist the sheriff's department in addressing a deputy shortage because the budget is inadequate. But if it's a hiring and attrition issue, that's a different matter. Can you speak to that? Just
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit. I know Jeff and his team put the request forward, but when Sheriff Luna came into office, one of the things was employee wellness as well, and the amount of vacancies and drafting that the deputies are going through right now. We determined we can't take those more deputies from the field to move them over there at this point. But again, we are ramping up the recruitment and hiring. So hopefully once that gets done and there's a little bit of relief on the deputy side, then we can move deputies to the Met team, because we know how important it is.
Okay, by the way, I don't want to take up all the time here, but I do have one more question if I could, Mr. Chair, and that is it the goal of the Met teams to respond or be able to respond to all 5150 calls, and do you respond to all 5150 calls, or are they part of those 1,300 that we were not able to respond to?
They're going to be part of those 1,300. Our goal would be to respond to all, but sir, in all honesty, I'm not sure if we'll ever get there, but I think we should have that goal and strive to get there.
Yeah. Right.
It's impactful.
Ms. Brown, what are the restraints in terms of staffing additional Met teams from the point of view of the mental health department?
I would say it's similar to what the sheriffs, I'm sorry, I forgot Jim. Responded. We have a lot of vacancies. We have made a lot of announcements, including individuals to transfer. But again, the response is not there. And I think there's two issues that were brought up earlier, but regarding the safety in the community. Because of what we're experiencing in today's society, they have a lot more concerns or going out on the community. Safety, it's an issue that they share. They said, well, I don't know if I want to do this type of work because of the experiences. Having said that, I have to say that with our staff, we have not had major incidents or adverse outcomes for those who are doing field work. We're also adding training. We're really bringing, as Mr. Gale said, we are really including peer support specialists who are community health workers with lived experience through their own or through their family members to really be part of our teams. That will give us an increase, and we have contracted out with some of the providers. However, the shortage of clinicians and even of peers, it's very evident for field work.
Wouldn't workplace safety, though, concerns, wouldn't they be, we're hearing about teams now the county is funding that they're just clinicians, but wouldn't you have better workplace safety where you're dealing with a seriously mentally ill person in a crisis situation if you're accompanied by a law enforcement, a trained deputy who's part of a Met team rather than otherwise? I'm just wondering if you could comment on that issue of workplace safety from a point of view of Met teams as opposed to PMRT teams, MCOT teams, and all it looks like we're trying a lot of different things, but don't we have the best model here that we should be pursuing? I don't know. Let me comment on that. Bless you.
I have to say that it all depends on the clinician. As a clinician and as having done field work, and I continue to do field work, it takes a special kind of condition to be safe, to feel, because it's not just about the training. It's how you feel, how you handle yourself out on the field, how do you connect with people that makes a difference. So there are some clinicians that are very against working with law enforcement. And they will never take a job with that regardless of whether it's an officer or a clinician. And again, we go through the process, we tell them what it is, they're gonna be in a police car, or, we let them know. And there's others that will prefer to work with law enforcement because they do feel safer being with an officer. or a deputy out on the field.
Captain Dietrich, do you want to just make a brief response to that? Then I'll yield the rest of my time.
No problem, Rob.
And I think it's relevant because I've been on both sides of this. Traditional law enforcement in this realm is shown to be a failure. Not even disputable. But this is different. When you take deputy sheriffs that have the training that we have with the crisis intervention training and all the mental health training, it's a game changer. And so traditional law enforcement, pairing just a regular patrol deputy who's not been through this training with a clinician, sometimes it fails. But when you put a deputy with this kind of specialized training with any civilian partner, they start to recognize, oh, this is different. And so we've seen it with the homeless outreach model. We've seen it with the MET model. So one of the things that we did on the homeless side was we took our host deputies that were specially trained and collaborated with hundreds of partners and did a specialized training for them and let them see a different side of law enforcement. And so I think that's the difference here. And so she's my partner. We talk more than we ever thought we would. And so our relationship, as it strengthens, has been more collaborative. We're looking at being innovative, maybe doing a training for a bunch of civilians in that realm to show, hey, this is different. And so I think that's the break from traditional law enforcement versus this model. That's where the change can happen.
Thank you.
If I may just jump in with a thought, and I agree with everything that everybody said. And NAMI, we have been strong supporters of MET and SMART and all these initiatives. But if there were 1,300 calls that MET couldn't take, the question as a family member that I would ask is, what happened to those families? You know, if MET didn't show up, who showed up, or did no one show up? And I think we need to look at that because there's still a person who was in crisis who didn't get a MET team. So what happened? And in some cases, maybe nobody showed up. And in some cases, maybe a regular sheriff deputy showed up. But we need to look at those outcomes too. Thank you.
JP, okay. Can I ask Captain Dietrich, like when you say traditional law enforcement is a failure, that's such a powerful statement, first of all. I mean, on this issue, of responding to people struggling with mental illness and crisis. I think that's right. I was on the Met ad hoc, where 6 years ago now, JP, isn't it? We asked for 60 teams, and we were low. We should say that. We were low then, and we're nowhere near there. How can this not be a priority in the budget? And to our Assistant Sheriff Francisco, who's taken over, thank you. Like MET is the field, isn't it? I mean, it is the field. That's the whole point. Like it's taking those specially trained people, putting them in the field, which prevents people who are struggling with mental illness from being shot and killed by people who don't know how to respond to that situation. But then, like when I see the budget priorities, like our last time, this commission got pushback on MET being a major budgetary priority. And in light of what you're saying, shouldn't it be like way up there?
Well, obviously, I would defer to the assistant sheriff regarding that, but I'll clarify. And that's why I said, because I've been on both sides. As a patrol deputy, which I'm proud of my patrol career, I didn't have this knowledge. So traditional law enforcement, you had two options: arrest or drive away. That's it, at the end of the day. Maybe you knew someone at a church or at a facility that you could connect someone with. Today, we're in a different time. So with this specialized training, we're empowering our personnel with different skill sets that we didn't have back then. And so that's why I say traditional law enforcement was arrest or drive away. Now we have all these options in the community. But if the deputies don't even know what they are, you can have all the options you want. But our deputies that are specially trained with MET, they know the options. And so that force multiplier, a deputy calls a deputy, hey, yeah, you can take them to this facility. We may not be able to get there for you, but you can go here. And that's where the more that we can expand, the greater we'll see the community service, being met.
And I'll just add, obviously, we agree and we want that to expand, but we have contracts that we can't just since we're at such a low level of staffing, we wouldn't just be able to move these deputies and remain compliance with those contracts.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Hans, you have to take
Note that from Mark Gale's comments, it looks as if NAMI's presence in training goes back to the era of Daryl Gates. And I want to note that if we are pushing for progress in this area, we have never had leadership from the top of this explicit level of support for the work that you're doing as now. And so if we are going to try to achieve these objectives, it's going to take constant pressure, not just from this body, which I pledge to do my part, and I know my colleagues join in doing, but from the public also, to make sure that this moment does not pass, that this administration's tenure does not pass without achieving the goals set up years ago by this commission in partnership with you and your colleagues. So we need to be impatient, and we need to keep expressing that impatience. The public needs to do the same, because we've never had this level of openness to the implementation or the meeting of these objectives. So that's one factor I want to put on the record here, and that we must keep up the pressure and the impatience to meet these goals.
In our training with the deputies, we call that a window of opportunity. And when that window is open, we tell them run right through it. Don't let it close.
And our participation with the Sheriff's Department in Los Angeles really dates back formally to 2015.
Jeff, can you explain out of those calls that Met did not respond to, were those requests from deputies that were in the field already?
So there's more, and I will not give you inaccurate data because I don't have the complete subset of the data, but I do know that includes all the calls from, because remember, we're the counties, so it's CHP, all the outside agency requests, all the different entities. So that's just not 1,300 LA County Sheriff phone calls or calls for service weren't answered. I will follow up with you and give you a breakdown of those. But it was important to me when I heard Mr. Gale speak of that's clear. And I hadn't brought it up because it was in our year-end report. But I will find that data for you. But it's all inclusive of every single request of Met that was not able to be handled.
Irma, you were the first person with a question, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is for Mrs. Brown. On your recruitment efforts is my concern. Have you ever thought about attending some of the veteran health fairs? Because you may find veterans who are leaving the service. And then I'm not sure about the categories that you're hiring. I notice you mentioned nurses and social workers, but what other professionals are you hiring for your teams?
We are hiring licensed site technicians, nurses, social workers, marriage family therapists, psychologists.
Okay.
Everything that it's within that. Additionally, we're looking for community health workers or peer resource specialists who have lived experience through their own or through their family members to be part of the team. So in the past, we had, the team was made up of 2 clinicians. About a year ago, with the implementation of the alternative crisis response and all the changes that are going in the county, it's a clinician and a peer resource specialist who are responding to field calls, which is giving us the opportunity to increase the number of mobile crisis teams in the community. Then we're also contracting with private entities or legal entities to bring additional teams, but they're having the same challenges. In terms of where are we going, we're going everywhere and anywhere. We're calling. I know my staff has called, and don't quote me on this, but it was about 200 clinicians, all classifications that we call, and they all decline an interview.
Okay.
We try to tell them the information. We're working with the American Psychological Society, going to them, the National Association of Social Workers, working with the colleges for the LPTs to be part of it with the veterans. So we're trying everything and anything we can. We have the loan repayment plan for newly graduates. We're working with those who receive stipends to come. We're offering a lot more flexibility. We have to comply with certain regulations with the Board behavioral sciences for psychologists, marriage family therapists, and social workers. So we're trying to work. I know that coming to the Med team, traditionally it's expectation to be licensed. We're now looking into, as long as you have complete the requirements by the Board of Behavioral Sciences that cannot be fulfilled with Med, we're working with that as well.
Okay. Have you tapped the retired?
I think we have tried everything, and now we tried everything. We have our veterans get additional points. I mean, we done hiring fairs, local fairs.
Okay.
So we're trying just about everything that we can do. Again, field work requires a special type of person, whether it's with a mental evaluation team or with a civilian team. And whether it's the day or the nighttime, you have to like to be out on the field, be in areas that are not comfortable. Walking in somebody else's home, it's not it's not the ideal situation for some individuals. Doing an assessment on the park could be a little bit of a challenge. So when you do crisis work, it's a whole different element. And the clinicians and the peers must and shall feel comfortable doing that. Because people could have trainings and trainings, but it's how you handle yourself out on the field.
Okay. The next question is for Captain Diedrich. You talked about the new training center and everything that you're doing there, which sounds excellent. But you mentioned something about trying to train individuals as well. So what type of community people have you tried to reach to do some of this training?
Oh, we've reached various different business groups. We've different utilities, different community groups have reached out for the training that we've been able to accomplish.
Okay. And then
We offer it here too, to you.
Okay. And then the data in the triage center, how are you using that? Because it appears to me that data can be used to support that you might need more community service or to support more Met teams. So how is that data being utilized?
I think in all, and I'm going to make sure I understand your question, meaning all the data from our calls that come in?
Mm-hmm. And what you were able to provide. I mean,
So-
is that data using to support the need for more Met?
Yes, ma'am.
teams?
And that's where our leadership and Sheriff Luna and his executive team, by sitting down and looking at that data-driven, they said, well, we need this. So it wasn't even, what's the word, controvertible. It was accepted that there was always an acceptance of this mission's important, but seeing where we need to get better, that was accepted by that data. Maybe that wasn't the best way of answering it, but yes, that data is used to show the need and the necessity for expansion and growth. And we haven't had any barriers other than happen. You know, everyone's agreeing with that.
Thank you.
Okay. JP?
Yeah, thank you, Captain Diedrich. Couple of things. I think you and I are in total agreement that having a patrol deputy respond to these calls is not the optimum because they just don't have the training that the Met deputies have. But I am wondering, because I know there is value, the more training we can give our regular patrol deputies to make them aware of the challenges they may be confronted with. That was typically handled by the CIT training, and I know there was a goal at one time of getting every patrol deputy CIT trained.
Yes.
Where are we in that particular endeavor?
So we've obviously fallen short. And I look and I echo Mr. Gale's comments about some trainings have had to be canceled because stations were unable to send personnel due to their obligations at their station. And so that is something that we want to see improve. And with our training, I think we're at 1,000. It's in the report, but I believe we're around 1,500, and that's an approximation. But we are in patrol school. So there's an abbreviated version of some of these things that are getting to deputies. One, to let them know the resources exist. One, to inform them about the triage desk. So although maybe not all of them are getting the 32-hour sit training, which I believe they should, they are getting portions. And so even having a deputy understanding there's a triage desk, there is someone you can call if you're in this situation. We've used whatever we can within station briefings, patrol school, supervisory school, different touch points to get the message out, but it's not the full-blown training. And I believe there's a significant difference between training in presentation mode and training mode. I could present the training to you, or I could train you. And I think there's two differences. And I think with what we're currently experiencing, sometimes we have to go to presentation mode just to get the information, maybe at a 30-minute briefing at a station. It helps, but it's a Band-Aid.
And one follow-up too, I noted that we still are way deficient in the number of milos that are out in the field. I know I personally believe that every station should have on Milo the $35,000 price tag for each unit, frankly, is almost budget dust in the sheriff's department. When you look at how we want to change the culture of the department and going to training once or twice a year, and frankly, I'm sure most of our folks don't see a Milo that often. You're never going to affect that sea change we all want to see occur unless we have consistent ongoing training, practically probably on a monthly basis, and that's never going to occur unless we get those Milos out at the station level. I know there's a lot of issues with that. I get it. There's staffing issues. There's also the money. But I firmly believe the sooner we can get these Milos out to every station and the staff there trained up so they can, on a 1 and 2 person basis, as time and duties permit, pull people out of the field and run them through Milo scenarios, that's when we're going to see the sea change start to happen. I've been to the CIT training. I know how powerful that is. It's one of the most powerful trainings the department put on. It was amazing how you'd go out at break time and the deputies were all talking amongst themselves going, wow, I never realized all this before. And so many of them would say, wow, I got an uncle at home or an aunt and they show these problems and now I feel much more comfortable dealing with them. But it was so powerful. And the Milo just re-emphasized that to where they start thinking, and I know I just use myself as an example. After going to that training, I was driving home and I see some person cutting in and out of traffic like crazy in the middle of the day. I'm thinking to myself, now, if I was back in the old days, I think, well, that's just some knucklehead driving like a crazy person. But now I'm thinking, well, it could be they're having a manic situation. That's why they're driving that way. That's why they're putting themselves and everyone else in that situation. And if I would have contact with that person as a patrol deputy, would I now approach that from a very different perspective? And I say, yeah, I probably would. So I just see the value in that. I know we here probably can't affect that change immediately, but I hope you understand how important I think the whole commission feels that training is hugely important. We all know that. Unfortunately, in budget crunch times, training is the first thing that goes, and we've got to really fight against that. But this Milo training and the CIT training for all patrol deputies needs to happen because we just don't have enough MET to get around. And as important as MET is, they're never going to be the first responder on so many of these calls where the uniformed deputy is. So the more we can emphasize that, I'll get off my soapbox, but I think you understand how important I think this is.
Well, I hear you loud and clear, and I'm very proud of our personnel at MET. So the training deputy and the training sergeant, they've on their own went and found training days at stations and brought Milo and did trainings with them. And so it's not a perfect world, but we're getting those things, at least trying. And so we're being able to touch a greater amount of our personnel, and I'm proud of them for coming up with this. And they rotate every Wednesday, or I think it's every Wednesday, and they'll go to a different station. They get people for an hour, fine. If it's 2 hours, but it's something. And so we don't want to give up, but we won't, but we're trying. But to your point, having the Milo is also, you need to have an instructor that knows how to run it. You need to do it the right way because bad training doesn't help. We need the training to be good. But yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
I just want one last question. So I want to thank you, Miriam, for your presentation. In full transparency, Miriam was my field instructor when I was a graduate student about 17 years ago. So, you know, with where we're at with TMH in the county and mental health services, I think in general, you know, back in the days when Mental Health Services Act was funded and the county was ramping up and hiring and the FSP clinicians, the whatever it takes model. I recall a lot of my friends got hired on with the county and, you know, psychiatric social worker got burned out and left, you know, basically moved on into private practice or a whole other career. So here we are now with this, you know, shortage. However, you know, I do think with the presentations that we're hearing today and this need for, I still believe, well, with Kelling, and that opened up the door for a lot of people in the community who suffer from mild to moderate mental illnesses and their engagement with law enforcement, because a family member doesn't discern if it's serious mentally ill or if they're mild to moderate. And so when they pick up the phone and call law enforcement, whether it's a sheriff's deputy or a contract city or a local PD, you know, there's this whole kind of rush, you know, that happens, and then something can escalate. It was good to hear from Captain Diedrich about the Community Partnership Bureau. But I'm wondering how, from the level of the community level, educating the community, because you mentioned about the training. When I worked in Skid Row, the SMART team, LAPD had a brochure that you can download, and then when you're calling 911, these are the things you need to say so it can get relayed. That was the ideal. And so I had my staff, we printed it out, trained our staff because they would be calling. And that would help because a lot of times when the officers would come, you know, they didn't know what they were walking into, even though we did try to follow the processes. And so here we are, you know, I think from the county level with the sheriff's department, I don't know if there's any kind of brochure like that where county, you know, I don't know if that's in a budget, but it seems like I really do believe there should be a lot more, there needs to be a lot more community education on at the family level and calling up 911 when they do and informing so that gets on record. And hopefully, you know, then when a deputy shows up, if it's a co-response model or if it's another, you know, the PMRT team, then, you know, the family can feel a little comfort knowing that their loved one's going to get connected into a system of care.
Thank you, Luis. And so it's a lot that you told me, but in essence, I'm going to give you a short answer. The Department of Mental Health and the Med team does have something similar to SMART now when they have all the numbers that they can call, the different places they can call. However, like I mentioned earlier, the alternative crisis response about 3 years ago was a countywide. A year ago became just part of mental health. And we were doing right now with the alternative crisis, as you may be aware, that 988 became our national mental health line as of July 1st, 2022. We are working, and as we speak today, which I'm missing that, but I'm happy to be here with you guys, we're holding the Summit of the Cities. Department of Mental Health held the Summit of the Cities this morning from 8:30 to 12, where we're bringing, you know, law enforcement, the cities, everybody together, because there's so many teams out there. There's crisis teams, there's no crisis team. Each city wants to do something that it becomes very confusing to families. So what are we doing? We have the 988. The 988, it's going to be able to assist individuals either just to talk to them or the phone, via text, whichever way they want to. But if it's learned that they need a psychiatric mobile response team on 911, then they're going to transfer the call to our 800 number with the Department of Mental Health, who will be deploying a team. Or if they need 911, they're going to gather more information and trying to educate the family that they're going to be calling 911 because it's urgent and it's an emergency. And it could be a call response model. That'll be the ideal if it's mental health, or it could be just patrol, but the information is going to be given to attend the needs of the community and the family. We have had a lot of campaigns in terms of how do we educate the community, because we are really listening to what the community wants. And to Commissioner Bonner earlier, you have the PMRT, the MCAT. Now we came up with one word, which is the field intervention teams. And they're all going to be mobile crisis teams. But we really need to, we're working in a more coordinated effort. How do we coordinate the services? The next step, and we're really working with law enforcement, we have a work group in terms of when a person calls 911, many individuals, a lot of us, 911 is an emergency, that's the first number we will call. But that doesn't mean we want police. That's because what we know. So now I know that LAPD has done a pilot project with DD Hirsch where if a call comes through the 911 system, they transfer them to DD Hirsch or what's now the 988. They make the determination, what do they need? Do they really need police? Do we need to transfer for a mobile crisis? Do we need to call fire? And we have our new team, which is the Therapeutic Transportation Program, which is a collaborative with fire. They may give the call to fire, fire goes and attends to the emergency. And if it's a mental, there's no need for medical, but there is a need for a mental health, they will deploy the Therapeutic Transportation team. So we have the 988, we have our 800 number, 854-7771, which is 20, both of them are 24/7. We are really working hard to bring teams 24/7. Our goal is to respond to all and each call within an hour or less. And it's pretty ambitious, but I think we can get there. That's always been our goal, to increase the teams. So then that way families don't have to call 911. Because there are times that they may call one of our, they may want one of our teams, but if we're not available and the situation escalates, then they may call 911. Or oftentimes they call both. They call the 800 number or they call 911 to see who gets there first. So education is happening. We're doing a lot of campaign in terms of where to call. We work very closely with Mark and NAMI to provide the information. He provides you with some of the information. And our goal is to really coordinate the services. Because in a given day, everybody's talking to the same client. How do we utilize the resources that we have? And how do we work with the community? How do we work with our response teams? And how do we work with those teams who are not mental health, but they're providing some services in the community, particularly for the homeless clients? Hope I answered your question, Luis.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have to conclude because we have to move on to our last agenda item. But I want to say this commission is tougher and pushier than it looks. And I think we're going to celebrate one day when we hit 60, Holly, because it's been a long time. And I guess 35 is better than 5, but we really need to hit that mark. The ad hoc was very thoughtful and serious back then. And Jeff, I'm going to take you up on your offer. I think others will too, on training. So you just need to let us know through our executive director when and how many hours, because I intend to go through that training.
Yes, sir. If I might, Commissioner Garcia, we do have a trifold that all the deputies have in their cars and they hand out all the time. We have thousands of them. I'll make sure I send one to the commission. Okay. And then secondly, I just forgot what the other one was.
Mylar.
The what?
Mylar.
Yeah, but on that training, all that goes out, but there was another point I was going to make, but, and then in the recent days, we are going to be implementing for the first time only 988 on the LA County Sheriff's Department. So it was nationwide, rolled out last year. LAPD's had it. We have not used it yet. We will be meeting with Assistant Sheriff Francisco. We've been working with our DMH partners. 988 pilot will be rolled out here very shortly. And so that's the one thing I wanted to make sure we told you.
And I do just want to note the value of the text response to 988. We're getting nationwide feedback. I get it at the community level that people who get text response on 988 are making recurring reference to the text messages they receive in response as a touchstone for future moments of stress and of spiraling thoughts that may lead to a follow-up call. But having that text message response on their phones has an enduring value that goes well beyond the moment.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our last item on the agenda, the difficult issue of tasers. And we have three speakers here today. Amy Nguyen from Axon, thank you for being here. We also have on virtually the one and only Carl Douglas, an attorney who has represented community members who have been tased, and Dr. Kafani Tour, an assistant professor at Mount St. Mary's University, who knows about tasers. So I'm going to turn it over to our ad hoc. They've done some great work. Commissioners Johnson, Garcia, and Harris. And Hans, I understand you're going to introduce this topic.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair Kennedy. I just want to thank my fellow commissioners for their work on our report, which was appended to today's agenda from the Ad Hoc Committee on Technology. And I want to thank the other members of the commission for their interest in this that we are trying to serve with the report. There was a public comment issued months ago in March on this issue, and all the public comments we received are included in the report's footnotes. And your comments and concerns about the Sheriff's Department use of tasers was the initial catalyst for this action by the Ad Hoc Committee. I urge people to read the report. It includes some useful history about the devices and their presence and prevalence of use in Los Angeles and in neighboring jurisdictions. And I also want to note that it includes a comparison of policies with the other jurisdictions in the area. And we were also subject to a demonstration I believe that was in May, just 2 months ago. Many, I believe most members of the commission took part in that demonstration at the Hall of Justice. And that included the demonstration of the most recent device, that's the Taser 10. It will apparently be piloted at Men's Central Jail, at the North County Correctional Facility, and the Century Station. I'm, for one, am extremely eager to see what the review in that pilot of the Taser 10 concludes. So after reviewing and analyzing the data and the documents to create the report, the Ad Hoc Committee recommends that the commission request of LASD to review and revise Taser policies and procedures in consultation with the OIG, that the LASD post Taser use reports on their website to increase transparency. It's not exactly easy to locate now, but I know there has been some commitment to improve the user experience and the logic of finding that data on the LASD site, and that the LASD provide a written report following the Taser 10 device pilot program. The Sheriff's Department was sent the report for feedback. I know that the committee received back a word that they would be reviewing it. LASD would be reviewing it. Although I don't believe we received that back in time for today's meeting. So with that, with the appending of that report to today's agenda and the awaiting of the response from that report, which we know has been committed, I turn it back to you, Sean.
Okay, so our first speaker is going to be Amy.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the commission. I commend you for really digging into the issue of Taser energy weapons and doing the research, as well as the ad hoc committee. It is not
easy to understand, and there are some misperceptions out there. But we really appreciate the opportunity to join forces and really serve as a resource here. I want to go into a little bit of background first. So most of my career has been spent in private practice. Half of that was doing criminal defense, where I saw issues of excessive force. The other half of that was in civil litigation, where I again saw issues of excessive force. And so one of the reasons, the main reason I joined Axon is because I recognized there being a gap and room for improvement, quite frankly, in use of force, and wanted to help create change. And that's really what led me to Axon. It is a mission-driven company. Next slide, please. And that mission has always been to protect life. So it was founded by Rick Smith back in the 90s, and it was a result of two of his friends being shot and killed. And so he really wanted to see, is there a less lethal solution? Why are we still using guns? Is there technology that can be created that protects life and reduces serious injuries? So that is our mission. We just recently launched our moonshot goal, what we're calling our moonshot goal, and that is to reduce lethal shootings between law enforcement and the community by 50% in 10 years. One part of that we believe is technology, but there's many other factors that need to come together to make that really successful. Next slide, please. So to date, we have approximately saved 275,000 lives from death or serious bodily injury. We are not done. As I just said, the moonshot goal is a really serious goal of ours. And so we are continuing to strive, and that includes evolving our technology to make it better, to make it safer, to make it more efficient for those law enforcement that are using it on subjects in the community. Next slide, please. And so it really is a response to resistance that has three prongs, the biggest being safety, of course. Now, no use of force is risk-free, including hands-on. But I will go through studies that show that it is the safest, less lethal use of force out there on an officer's tool belt. Effectiveness, we are very well aware in fact, there was just a recent published study in 2020 showing when tasers are pulled out by officers in the field, but it's not effective, that it can lead to more serious injury and even death, because officers it can escalate and result to lethal force. And so we are constantly working to improve effectiveness. You mentioned the Taser 10. It is going to be, we predict, the most effective device out there as we continue to iterate on each model. And then lastly, accountability. This is the only use of force that is tracked, period. So we have exact logs that show when was it activated, for how long. Did the officer do a check before the shift, which we call a function test, to make sure that it's working properly prior to going into the field? We now have pulse graphs since 2013. The pulse graphs will tell you what is going on with every single pulse. Did it have connection to the subject, and for how long? Did it have the potential to create what we call neuromuscular incapacitation, or that muscle lockup, or was it a miss? Or was it just arcing in open air? Was it a drive stun? Was it probe deployment? So this really creates accountability. Of course, we also are a manufacturer of body-worn cameras, so that is consistent with our goal there to create accountability and transparency. Next slide, please. So we know that, of course, what we hear about most often is the usage of taser energy weapons, when it is deployed, when it is used either in probe or drive stun mode. But what often goes unrecognized is the deterrent value, because they have been out there for so long. 99% of law enforcement agencies in the United States use them, and people recognize them. They know what they can do. And because of that deterrent value, we have seen a really big increase of being able to gain compliance of the subject without actually having to deploy. But what this requires is the officers to have the time, right, the luxury of time and space first to try to de-escalate. And then also number two, for them to be trained on how to de-escalate. So don't immediately go to deployment. You want to first show it, which is presence compliance. We have warning arcs. You can arc in front of the device. On the TASER 10, it's a warning alert. You can actually place the laser on the subject and say, hey, the laser is on you. I'm going to deploy if you don't comply. And then lastly, there's deployment. We are not good at tracking those statistics in the United States, but we do have some statistics here in California that I will go over, but internationally it's tracked more so, the UK, Wales, and they are showing upwards of 80 to 90% compliance without even deploying. And the reason why those aren't tracked is it's often not considered to be a use of force unless it's deployed. And so you aren't going to see those de-escalation resolutions if you aren't actually tracking it as a use of force. Next slide, please. So here's some statistics with agencies here in California from what we have been able to gather. And as you can see, it's anywhere from 62 to 77% compliance without actually having to deploy, so just displaying or doing a warning arc. Next slide, please. So what I've been asked primarily to focus on today is the safety. So with our mission to protect life, we obviously want to create devices that are going to do just that. And so we put them through rigorous safety testing. We have a science and medical advisory board that consists of doctors throughout the world, domestically and internationally. And we go through phases of pre-release testing, and that is cardiac safety that's done at Johns Hopkins, physiologic and metabolic safety that's done on human volunteers to ensure that it is safe physiologically. We do a probe wound profile to, again, make sure that when the probe makes contact with the subject that we aren't actually having any penetration injuries and that it is going to be safe on the subject. And then lastly, effectiveness testing. So we want to ensure it's actually going to accomplish the goal, and that is to create that muscle lockup in the 5-second cycle. So this testing, as I said, cardiac testing done at Johns Hopkins, but ultimately we publish those results once they are peer reviewed. Hopefully that we'll have somebody that will accept the publication. And so those are all out there with each model. Next slide, please. So this is the most studied use of force tool. There are now over, last track, 920 to 30 published peer-reviewed studies, articles, reviews, papers on TASER energy weapons. Much more so back in 2000 to 2010 timeframe when they were still in large part unknown. And so there was a lot of studies. Most of those studies, by the way, upwards of 70% are completely independent. That's just independent researchers wanting to do studies on these devices and see how well they work and how safe they are or aren't. This is one such study back in 2018, and it essentially looked at almost 1,400 use of force by 3 different agencies. The CEW you can see on the pie chart, which you can't really read all that well, but CEW was used 36% of the time, only second to hands-on physical force. And there was no moderate or severe injury, so it really compared it to other uses of force, baton, hands-on physical force, chemical weapons, pepper spray, canine, and it said that the conducted energy weapon use was the force modality least likely to result in significant injury. There are several studies very similar to this, looking at, let's compare TASER energy weapons to other weapons on an officer's belt. This is just one, though, that's probably more recent. Next slide, please. Here's another one. Now, this one was interesting because It actually is a comparative model where it looked at an agency that implemented a taser energy weapon program versus an agency that did not. And it found that both for officer and suspects, the injury rate went down. So suspect injury rate was reduced by 79%, and then for officers by 87%. So you can see the blue lines for those that had the taser energy weapon program versus the red lines for those that did not, and injuries went up. Next slide, please. So what are the safety risks? I am not here to say that taser energy weapons are without risk, because again, anytime there's a use of force, there's going to be risk of injury or death involved. What we do know, though, is out of approximately 5.3 million field uses, where we see the fatalities are involving uncontrolled falls and then flammables. So uncontrolled falls to date, we have tracked 21, and that's really when it's deployed in a situation. Typically the subject is at an elevated location and they fall and they suffer a traumatic head injury, or they fall on something that causes death. So we do warn against this. It's a known risk, and we really implement that as well in our training protocol and our certification program, and then encourage agencies to adopt similar guidelines in their policy for use, because you really want to balance against the risk of injury to the subject if they're at an elevated location versus what is the risk of harm, the immediate risk of harm presented by the subject to either the officer or others. So it definitely is a balance, but it needs to be addressed in training. And then the others are ignitables. So we recently saw one of these at a gas station where it was deployed very close to a gas pump that had gasoline pouring out of it onto a motorcycle, and the subject ignited, as did one of the officers. So that's something we also warn against. You also have to train, but it has to be known. So there are circumstances where it's not known that they're in a flammable environment. We see that in meth labs, for example, and it's deployed and it can ignite. One of the great things about Taser 10 is we previously had 50,000 volts. That is not 50,000 volts that goes into the subject, but that is simply the arcing voltage for the probes to arc to the subject and make the connection. With the Taser 10, we were able to reduce that. It's a low voltage system to 1,000 volts. So what we have found in our testing thus far is we have not been able to ignite because it is low voltage. So that's really an improvement. I won't say, I don't think we're going to say ever, but all the testing we've done to date, including dousing, dummies, and gasoline, we have not been able to ignite. And then, of course, serious injuries. We have eye injuries. We had a recent case where an individual was charging at an officer and at the last second kind of hunched over and went down into a tackle position, and the probe penetrated the eye. So we do see those thus far, 22. 5 non-fatal burns, and then there's spinal and brain injuries resulting from falls, and that's at a number of 4 to date. Next slide, please. And so the other study that I want to highlight during my time is the physiologic and metabolic effects that a taser energy weapon can have, because this is oftentimes a misunderstanding. This study actually said, okay, we want to see, we know we haven't actually seen a directly induced cardiac arrest or an electrocution or ventricular fibrillation in the field. And we believe that that risk is very, very low based upon our cardiac testing. But what about cumulative effects? If a person is already under stress, they're running, they're exerting themselves, could a taser energy weapon deployment add to their cumulative stress and therefore have cardiac effects? And this is probably the most notable study on that, where they looked at, let's compare an exposure of a taser energy weapon to circumstances that suspects in the field are often subjected to. Next slide, please. And here are some of those things. So number one, fighting. And they have an individual punch a bag for 45 seconds straight. Running, canine takedown, at the end of running, actually jumping over a pony wall, which it shows one of the pictures. And so they're tracking these individuals. What is going on with their metabolic state? Are they getting to a level of metabolic acidosis, which can lead most times to death? Next slide, please. And here are the results of that study. So on the left, again, a little bit difficult to see, but you can see that at the level of about 6.9, you get into a very dangerous state. And that is oftentimes difficult, if not impossible, to reverse. Even if you were presented to an ER at that state, oftentimes they aren't able to bring the subject back because they're already experiencing metabolic acidosis. So you can see from the lines there, and the green line is the taser energy weapon deployment, that it only affected a person's metabolic acidosis slightly, next to OC spray. OC spray is the top line. And so the rest of those activities, fighting being the worst, really increase that person's metabolic acidosis. If they have drugs on board, it's going to enhance that even faster. And then same with catecholamines to the right, you can see that OC spray, spiked it a little bit. Taser energy weapon being next, but by far it's punching that heavy bag that really spiked the catecholamines, which leads to that cumulative stress and can cause cardiac arrest. But again, with each of these, this is something that you would see right away. It's not going to be something that is going to be delayed for a matter of, extended minutes or hours. This is something that would take place rather quickly during the time that they are exerting themselves. So that is kind of a high-level overview of what we do to ensure that our weapons are being provided with an appropriate safety margin, not risk-free, but knowing what those risks are. And ultimately, as we continue to look at these studies, as we improve the technology and the safety of our devices going forward, so they can be used in an appropriate and effective manner in the field.
Thank you, Amy. And you'll stick around for questions?
Of course.
We're going to just have the other two speakers. And then I know members of the public want to comment, and we want to hear your comments. So, can we now hear from Carl Douglas, who is attending virtually?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
First of all,
Welcome, Carl.
Thank you, Commissioner, and the other commissioners for allowing me this opportunity to offer some words to you this afternoon. Let me first begin by saying I don't have a PowerPoint to present to you. I don't represent Axon or any taser company. I'm not going to try to impress with you any data or studies, because if I were given the time and the opportunity to appear with you in person, I too could present other studies and other data that would paint a far different picture than that which you have been provided. I have been operating in this landscape for most of my 43 years. I have spent that time representing victims of all types of police abuse. Many of the victims that I have represented over the years have in fact been victimized by the misuse of tasers. One such story I'd like to share with you today. Surprisingly, the story of Keenan Anderson, a fatality, does not come within the 31 fatalities that Ms. Nguyen has described with you, apparently. Mr. Anderson, a 31-year-old man who was otherwise in suitable health, encountered Los Angeles police officers on January the 3rd of 2023. He was in the neighborhood of Venice Boulevard and Lincoln in West LA. He then was suffering clearly from some sort of mental distress. So your prior conversation was particularly ripe and resonated with me now because the objects and the questions of mental health continue to plague law enforcement across the Southland. Mr. Anderson had an occasion where he spent 7 minutes talking with a law enforcement officer. So that you understand, every law enforcement officer who graduates from a post-certified academy in California are provided mental health training. They are provided crisis intervention training. They are provided with skills and techniques that should teach them how to interact with subjects who are then in the midst of some mental health crisis, whether that crisis is triggered by mental illness, alcohol, or drugs is of no moment. But every sheriff deputy who has graduated from your academy has been trained in mental health dealings. And the fact that your own leadership acknowledges the faulty aspects of that training should trigger some alarms with all of you. While there certainly needs to be enhanced deployment of MET teams, while there certainly needs to be the greater recruitment of non-warrior mentality specialists that are assigned, it is the culture, regrettably, that continues to be the problem. I suggest to you that when you send a hammer into a garden, it will treat all of the flowers like they are nails. The circumstances of Keenan Anderson's death reflects just that predicament. One officer who was trained and spent 7 minutes with him was clearly informed that he was not then in his right mind. He was talking in paranoid ways, very recognizable. He was then approached by several officers who were responding basically to a traffic collision call. And because of Mr. Anderson's paranoia, he retreated. It's important to remember, though, he was always unarmed. He was always respectful to the officer when the officer engaged him in 20 minutes. He was always on the ground, and the officer maintained a position of tactical superiority. When the other officers then ran toward Mr. Anderson in his paranoid state, he retreated. He didn't charge toward them. He did not pick up his dukes as if to fight. He did not kick or hit or scream. He retreated away and then took a position of submission on the ground. Then, Officer 2, 3, and 4 ganged on him. One of the officers then used a taser device and in a drive-stun mode applied 6 separate charges to Mr. Anderson's back while he was laying prone on the ground. The charges were applied on what I say is the back of his heart. 6 separate charges, each emitting 50,000 electrical watts of kinetic energy so that the charge could be activated. When you have 6 separate charges deployed repeatedly of an electromagnetic nature, is there any wonder then that Mr. Anderson's heart began to flutter? He was then handcuffed. An ambulance took him to a local hospital. And is there really any wonder that 4 hours later, trained hospital technicians were unable to synchronize his heart to beat regularly, and his heart in essence exploded and he died? Mr. Anderson's circumstance is not among the 31 fatalities out of the 5 million deployment that you've just heard about, but I'm sure there are others. Mr. Anderson's deployment reflects a deficiency not only in the Los Angeles Police Department's policy, but in the Sheriff's Department policy as well. Tasers are designed to reach a point so that the person that is tased reaches what is called NMI. That stands for neuromuscular incapacity. It is hoped that in the seconds or so after the taser prong is deployed, the body will go limp. And in the time that the body goes limp, officers will then be able to handcuff the suspect by putting the hands behind the back. Regrettably, however, deployments do not go as ordered as Ms. Lynn would have you suggest. You rarely have the opportunity or the time in so unbiased and careful a time to show and to warn and to point the laser and to give the suspect every opportunity available to him to submit before the taser is activated. Maybe the millions of occasions that she has reflected do not occur in such a diverse community as Southern California. Maybe the circumstances of her profile do not have the historical, racial, foundational aspects of law enforcement and the tensions that are regrettably an important part of the dynamic here in Southern California. Maybe there is not the same warrior versus guardian mentality that regrettably has been a vestige of the former administration, but a culture that still runs deep and courses through the very veins of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. So maybe that would explain that Miss Wynn's experience is far different than mine. Rarely have I found in my experience lasting 43 years that officers are able to reach that state of NMI such that they can then deploy handcuffs or take the suspect into custody without further actions. Regrettably, in my experience, the taser causes the suspect to squirm and to wiggle and to do everything he can to eliminate the pain that the taser probes are emitting. And regrettably, that effort to rid them of the pain is misinterpreted by the officers as continued resistance, leading to further force, leading inexorably to the suspect losing that battle against multiple officers. That has been the consequence, regrettably. That has been my experience more than that which you have already heard. The policy of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department is as vague as the policy of the LAPD. There is discretion that officers are given, but there is no guidance that is given into the specific number of deployments consecutively that could bring risk, that could bring damage, that could injure an otherwise normal heart. In the Keenan Anderson matter, Chief Moore conceded that the deployment of 6 taser charges consecutively was probably out of policy. But he had to also concede that there was no great mandate of what level above which would be unsafe. I suggest that the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, the Office of these Commissioners, if you are serious, gather data from medical technicians and attempt to develop a clearer metric, because given the vestiges of the past administration, I am not confident that without more, there would not be greater abuse. I am hopeful that if this new Taser 10 is of such lower voltage as Ms. Wynn suggests, I'm not worried about clothes being set on fire. I've never heard in 43 years of a case of someone's clothes being set on fire, but I have heard of suspects being tased. They are squirming in pain, and their efforts to resist the pain being reflected by the officers as further resistance, leading to the exertion of more force and regrettably more serious, injurious consequences. There's another troubling aspect that Ms. Wynn did not discuss with the older configurations of the taser. They feel similar to a handgun, and there have been very high profile mistakes of officers in the height and stress of the moment, hoping or intending to pull their taser and pulling their handguns instead. And while they hope to deliver a non-lethal blow on a suspect, delivering a lethal blow instead. There have been more public examples of that circumstance recently. I have had examples of that myself. That is not necessarily a position that talks about the dangers of taser itself, but if we are talking about tasers and related issues involving law enforcement, that I think is another important issue that should be part of the conversation. I thank you so much for allowing me this first opportunity to ever speak before this commission, because I have thoughts on several of the other remaining and important missions and issues of this commission. I look forward to other opportunities, please, asking me to come back in person like Ms. Wynn, so that I may share my views and my opinions on this very important topic. Thank you so much, Commissioners, for your time.
Thank you, Carl. And we will certainly invite you back. And we would love to have you here in person. You've really given us something to think about it, and I appreciate it. We have one more speaker. We occasionally have academics from universities weigh in, and today we have Dr. Kalfani Tour, who's I hope I'm saying that right, a former police officer and assistant professor of African and African American Studies at Mount St. Mary's University. Kalfani is joining us virtually as well, and please go ahead.
So first and foremost, I want to thank the commission and those who convened this particular conference. I can't think of any work that's more important than the subject at hand. I do want to correct the record and say that I am a assistant professor of criminal justice and African American Studies, and now affiliated with Widener University, which is located in the Philadelphia area. My research area is more qualitative. In fact, I'm trained as a qualitative social science in both cultural anthropology and urban sociology. And my particular areas of research deal with the intersections of race, place, and public safety. As such, I examine as one prong the nature of policing and race, the nature of police discretion and use of force. And so with that, over the last 5 to 10 years, I have been requested quite frequently by members of the media to examine and provide judgment, expert opinion, if you will, on police incidents of use of force. And so I'm so glad to talk about this. The first thing I want to say to Amy and Carl, I'm really honored to share this space with you and to engage with you. I want to just acknowledge that both Taser, now and Axon, attempted to do something I think that was, in theory, profitable for all parties concerned, and that is in the use of force continuum, which is a 5 to 6 step series of resources which a police officer can choose to solve a particular situation, a criminal matter, or some disruption, breach of peace, as we would say in law enforcement. And they attempted, in fact, as a company in the late 60s to fill a gap. Now, what is this gap? The first level of force, which I want to push back slightly on Amy and say that the most successful use of force is officer presence and not necessarily a taser, right? Next successful area of the use of force continuum has to do with verbal commands. So that is the second level in this use of force continuum. And then we go on from there, what we call empty hand manipulation. And then there's this sort of next tier, which is composing of 3 different areas. Aspatons or batons, if you're truncheons, as they would call them in the 19th century. It would be chemical weapons such as OC spray, and then tasers attempted to insert itself, and I think with good intentions and theoretically for good reason. Because that is, when you move from that level of force, pepper spray, the next level of force was the use of a firearm. And I would argue that that is a wide leap to go from an aspeton or chemical spray to deadly force. And what now Axon, or before Taser International, attempted to do was to fill that void with something that they thought, as they described it initially in their marketing campaign, as non-lethal. Well, you're right. As a qualitative social scientist, I am dealing with more rare incidents, if you will, and what Amy might classify as infinitesimally small in number when you compare 1,000 deaths in the course as a result of Taser deployment, 1,000 deaths in a 10-year span compared to 5-point-something million usages of the Taser. You know, I'm reminded by Ida B. Wells, who in her effort to convince the North that the lynch laws of the South were terrible in any form, whether those who were being lynched without due process or without, some consideration of justice, whether they were being lynched by the noose or by burning or by, bullets, that in fact, lynching is lynching. And what she attempted to do in the close of the 19th century was to convince the North that even though the lynchings of the South totaled somewhere in the area, she said, 10,000, but that the millions of contacts and encounters between white Southerners and African Americans were more on the positive side, that lynching itself was not to be dismissed as an insignificant or trivial problem. I think the deaths that result from the use of tasers matter. And there's no gainsaying here to withhold that I have actually called for a moratorium on the use of tasers. And I'm going to speak about this not as an academic, but I'm going to speak about this as a police officer. And that is simple. I am not trained as a medical professional. I'll let that sit for a while. I am not trained as a medical professional. I might be trained in the mechanical usage of the many sort of iterations of the taser. Now we're up to taser or the X10. But I don't know what is happening to the body as a police officer in Suto. I don't know what's happening. Here's what I do know, that if you're in a hyper state, if you're obese, if you're in an area that perhaps is a food desert, you might have not only obesity or malnutrition, but the other comorbidities is that you might have some chronic heart disease or some other condition that predisposes you to death as a result of the use of a taser. I know that if you're under the influence of alcohol, I know that you're under the influence of methamphetamines or cocaine or some other drugs, that the taser will have an exponential effect on you than not. And what I've come across in my professional experience, both in law enforcement as well as an academic who have responded to these stories, that most of these incidents, while they're not exclusively occurring in Black and brown neighborhoods, but they are concentrated and disproportionately represented there. And when you actually disaggregate some of this sort of opaque data and sort of arcane medical data, and you start looking at the sort of social context, the actual geospatial context of the deployments, they're in communities that are in fact suffering from food apartheid, or what we call food deserts. They have few medical clinics. They are registering on the indices of all types of bad health. They're inundated with drugs. They're overrun with liquor stores, etc. I can see that as a police officer, right? Like I can qualitatively drive through or patrol through a community and see those conditions. And that should bring some pause to the use of this, because I might in fact choose this use of force as a way to resolve a solution, but not realizing that there are comorbidities at play and cause the death, which in fact Taser or Axon says that their preeminent mission is to preserve life, to protect life, right? The second thing, though, is that a taser, the way in which it operates, certainly we hear the sort of audible sort of aspects of a taser being activated. But I would argue that the damage that's being done to the body is of low amplitude. In other words, I can hear the taser, but I can't hear the damage. I can't see the damage. And as a police officer, I'm not trained, in fact, to read the sort of the health indicators where somebody has declining health or they're going into cardiac arrest. It is clear that tasers, in fact, do contribute to AFib. They are known to pace or track the heart's rhythm, and thereby, with overuse or simply with the usage itself, may cause, in fact, cardiac arrest. And I want to again push back on Amy's commentary. The people who are appearing for these studies, how can we account for whether or not they share the same profiles as Black and brown people in these more destituted and deprived communities? How can we account for that? And in fact, we can't. And she may offer up data or research that indicates that the taser is an effective weapon and doesn't cause that much risk. And again, as the previous speaker noted, with more time, I could offer you up studies that I've read that link the use of tasers, in fact, to cardiac issues. This doesn't talk, often the commentary from Axon doesn't mention testicular torsion. It doesn't mention the effects of the taser on the kidney. And then simply for a police officer who doesn't understand that the application or the usage of a taser causes cognitive difficulties. So at the same time, I am trained to give a verbal command, tase you in this simultaneously, and expect you immediately thereafter to be able to comply. I am disoriented, which is in fact next to the neuromuscular incapacitation. The taser also creates what we call cognitive incapacitation. People literally can't think. It is excruciating pain, absolutely. And why wouldn't they comply? Because in many cases they can't think. But I, as a police officer, I am trained literally to bring the most expedient resolution to this matter. And if it is a criminal matter, that I make an arrest. And so there is this sort of medical side to it that police officers are not trained enough to understand or to appreciate. There is this environmental side, which Black and brown people primarily, which are the incidents that I've been asked to provide commentary on, are living within these environments that are predisposed to all kinds of comorbidities. So just on those 2 points there, I have called in the past for a moratorium on the use of tasers until, one, we can get the practitioners more proficient, not simply with its usage, but understanding the best application for it in these types of environments. And then lastly, I would say, and gladly open up for questions and or dialogue with your panelists. And that is to say, we don't talk about racism and classism and sexism. We simply have, or that is, sought for a stopgap, which Taser provided us, a stopgap between a lower level use of force and a lethal level use of force, which is by firearm. But race has always operated in our society, and LAPD, as well as the LA Sheriff Department, has a history of racialized policing and racial violence. This is not to paint all law enforcement as being racist, or for that matter, a cog in the wheel of white supremacy. That is not the point here. The point is to say that there are systemic issues, cultural issues, that might lead to the disregard of one's human life and human value towards the purpose or the sort of expedient use of this level use of force. So for that reason, I've called for a moratorium so we can find more humane approaches to dealing with crime and different breaches of public, to include looking at co-responders, whether they be mental health co-responders or other types of co-responders, investing in the infrastructure in these communities where citizens themselves are already engaged in public safety, investing in those types of local forms of agency, and thinking about how do we teach de-escalation. Now, Carl used Keenan Anderson, who is a teacher out where I'm at in the DC, Baltimore area. So I won't give you the story, in fact, of Daryl Tyree Williams, who was a recent victim of taser usage. Even after telling the officer he suffered from a heart condition, and he would succumb to that shortly thereafter to those uses of the taser. He was tased by drive-stun method at least 4 times. And I'm going to stop there.
Professor, I really appreciate your comments, and I hope that we can follow up with you about the studies about the heart attack connection, because I think that's an issue to people. We're scheduled to have a vote on this, so normally we would talk about it, but I would like to just take some public comment and then put this over for the acceptance of the report and a vote and a debate to the next meeting, if that's okay with my colleagues. So can we take some public comment? And I don't think we're going to have time, I'm sorry to say, for 2 minutes.
Yes, yes, we do have some people who have signed up for comments. We will do 1.5 minutes due to time constraints and to give everybody an opportunity to speak. Our first speaker is O. Francis. On item 3. Item 3 and 4, I'm sorry.
Oh, so we're not doing general public comment. We're going to cut off the time of the people. Okay. So maybe the reason that the Met is so low on staff is because nobody wants to work with police and nobody wants to be a cop. You're stealing bright and hopeful folks from the community and having them do ride-alongs to pull them into the delusion that y'all are helpful to the community. The outreach y'all do to folks on the street only surveils them to help you sweep the public sidewalks and toss their possessions. If you can only staff half of your goal for teams, that's a 50% success rate, and maybe you shouldn't get it funded then. Maybe call it a day. Invest the people's tax dollars, which, by the way, you just called $35,000 budget dust. What the hell is that? In something that we actually want, which is what the people want, which would be more effective, which you've said, more non-police response. So why are we talking about reinforcing the response of the police? We want to go away from traditional law enforcement, more community involvement. These are quotes from all of you, by the way. But how can we get there? But we can only get to people if we're carrying guns. The only remote fast response that comes is when people come with their guns and badges. The Met response without cops in the car is slow. And yet we keep hearing response and calls for more resources for the police. Budget has come up. Do y'all need more money? No, the people don't want more money for the police. CIT, which they've mentioned a bunch of times, stands for crisis intervention. Even though you keep abbreviating it to make us forget what that is, what do you call the police for then? What exactly are you trained to intervene in, if not crises? And since you don't do any training, you're not equipped in de-escalation, so then what are you doing? You're escalating. You don't do de-escalation, so you shouldn't get to carry them.
Thank you.
Not the best work you've done.
Our next speaker is Michael Williams, followed by Julia Diaz Martinez.
This is my first time being in front of this commission, and I've heard things about you all, but I always come in with a positive attitude to give you guys a chance to do things that I think are common sense and right. The fact that we have even a sheriff sitting here on this commission up with you all is shocking to me. The way that we talk about the sheriffs, that you talk about the sheriffs, are shocking to me. We are talking about an organization that has history in criminal activity. If any other organization that was contracted by this city had the history that the sheriff's department had, they would at least, at the very least, be stripped of any community engagement and have their funding cut. We are talking about state-sanctioned organized crime. We're not talking about a few rogue cops. We're talking about all the way to almost the head of the department. There are gang activities, gang leaders, multiple gangs within this sheriff's department. What this commission's job should be is not worrying about how do we give more money to Met teams or how do we better train officers. It should be how do we reduce the harm that sheriffs are causing to our community due to their criminal activity. That's what we should be focused on.
Thank you.
This is almost impossible to try to make comments on two different things, but I'll give it a try. So as a grandmother of a child who was murdered by an LA County Sheriff deputy gang member, I've had the opportunity to speak to family members who've also had their loved ones either murdered or beaten by sheriff deputies when they should have been conducting crisis intervention. It must be noted that already deputies are required by law to have some form of de-escalation. It's already law. The community needs increased investment in mental health treatment resources. There is only one condition where a sheriff department should be involved with that, and that is diverting a call. It should only be a dispatcher, and that call should go into a community or medical professionals that can handle these crises. Sheriffs only should be transferring phone calls to the correct mental health professions. Moving on, having to listen to a speech, a pitch for a product, being told that this is a misperception and they're going to change it. We heard the concept protect life. If that's not a George Orwellian doublespeak, I don't know what is. Let's go ahead and create a weapon to put in the hands of racist law enforcement agencies, to put another weapon. So they have a gun in one hand and a taser in the next. But can I just say one thing?
You can finish.
By the sheriff deputy's own data, 29% of usage of taser is inflicted upon the African American community, when they only make up 9%. It is a tool of racism. Please do not vote for this. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Raquel Dörfler, followed by Michelle Infante.
I'm gonna have to speed read. This is my educated opinion about the letter that was circulating from just a deputy. But my opinion is that this is the sentiment that's held by more than 1% of this department. So I'm gonna have to kind of paraphrase. The deputy's talking about the two incidents, or the incident in Winco, where he talks about the arrest of 2 robbery suspects. Goes on to talk about that the one suspect that was body slammed refused to comply with orders given by deputies. The deputy's own body cam disputes that characterization. And the force was used prior to her being handcuffed. Violence is always the choice of the suspect, according to this deputy, of those who decide to fight rather than deal with the legal consequences of criminal actions. I saw no criminal actions on the part of the person that was body slammed. She had the legal right to be filming. Basically, he's bemoaning the fact that the 2 deputies will no longer be able to help the community for the foreseeable future, and that the deputies in the Lancaster area see the removal of this hardworking personnel as nothing less than a lack of faith in the ability to perform our duties, and a betrayal from the sheriff and his command staff. That basically they're just reacting to a vocal few. I believe that's myself and other people. Once again, I feel this is more than 1% of the department's feeling about the removal of the deputies that body slammed the one person and punched the mother in the face. Thank you.
Thank you.
At first, I thought it was a joke that she came up here and gave you those numbers at 5 million. It's just absurd. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of autopsy reports, and in the autopsy reports, and including in incident reports, most of the time, and very, very, very seldom, do you see written in an autopsy report or an incident report that someone has been tased. Usually I can tell by looking at autopsy photographs and looking at the body, you can see where someone has injuries. And to those of you that may not understand, but when that stuff's not written in the autopsy or in an incident report, and that stuff goes to trial, the jury of our peers, those 12 people, don't have any understanding of what happened to that person because it's not written in there logically or in a way for someone to understand. It's not written in there in the autopsy report that there are marks from being tased. Sometimes it's in there and it says a laceration, but again, when that information is given to someone in trial, there's a misunderstanding there, and it's not been elaborated on what the cause of that is. And just again, to talk about in the medical field, when someone has a heart attack, they use electric type instruments to bring someone back to life. You're using it and it's killing people, and I think that there's nothing else to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Paula Yanes.
I don't know where to begin today after listening to to Amy talk about the taser guns. It's like, wow. We do not need any more guns, including taser guns in our community, and the damage and the hurt and the fatalities that it's caused to our community, and especially to individuals like it was stated, that more people of color, Black, brown people are tasered. We don't need any more guns. We have too many guns, too many police officers in our community to begin with. And we're here also, to continue, our dialogue regarding deputy gangs and the criminality of that in our communities. And that needs to continue, and something needs to be done about that. We've talked about it in the past, and I brought this issue up, in the past. I'm really upset about the discussion we had today, and just listening to what's going on and this violence that's going on into our community by police. It's traumatizing, even to me, even just today, listening to this garbage, because that's what it is. And it's appalling. It's not, and it's appalling that you think it's normal to talk about this and for profit. It's just totally wrong. So we need to invest in communities. We need to invest in programs for our youth so that they do not become incriminated, so they do not go into the Justice Department. We need to invest in families and put budget money that goes to the police department or part of that budget back into our community so that we could have programs so that we do not have this type of problems in our community. And we need to have less law enforcement, more programs for our families. It's so important. Mental health.
Thank you, Ms. Yanez.
So many,
Your time has expired.
I know it. We have so many people.
We have one more
suffering
person. You're
from mental
taking
health,
up
and
people's
that's where we
time,
also
Ms.
need to
Yanez.
invest our money.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have one more online speaker.
Okay.
Sorry. Tamara?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So first off, it's really unacceptable that law enforcement gets a limited time in a COC meeting and the public's time is getting cut. For example, you're combining agenda items rather than allowing us to speak on each one. That's not acceptable. Instead of getting 4 minutes, I'm getting a minute and a half, as well as families impacted. So in terms of MET, we just want all law enforcement out of mental health responses. We want them out of hospitals, schools, traffic stops, right? That money could actually be put in our communities for resources, okay? And that means that, we'll have the resources we need. And in turn, we don't need law enforcement responding to mental health calls. Time and time again, our people are abused and killed in these circumstances, like Nicholas Borges in the hospital, David Ordez, or Marco Vasquez, right? We don't want law enforcement responding to mental health calls, period. You don't need to be partnering with anybody. It needs to be community responses. All that budget money that goes to law enforcement needs to go into the communities. And I want to thank Mr. Douglas. Thank you so much for your comments. I want to echo everything he said. He was on point, and Mr. Ture, for your presentations, because they're the only two people on here that really said.
Thank you. To the members of the public who didn't get all the time that you're entitled to, I personally apologize. One reason that we've been doing town halls on Saturdays, I mean, we've done one in East LA, South LA, Palmdale, and Pico Rivera, is because we get to really focus on how policing impacts the community, and people are not on a timer and they get to talk. And the format of these meetings is just difficult because we're balancing a bunch of different competing interests. So I think the only appropriate thing to do with this topic of tasers is to put it over and to get more information. I'm hoping that the professor can give us the studies he said that he has. Amy, you've given us a lot of information. I appreciate it. I hope if we have more questions, we can ask Axon. And, Carl has, given us information. We have 3 speakers, all very earnest, all very passionate. And I think rather than voting, we should Hans, if you think it's okay, table this report to our next regular meeting so we can have a full discussion. If there's any other public comment, we could have it, and then we could vote.
And that would be in September, correct?
It would be, yes. Is that-
We can also get the studies that both Mr. Douglas and the professor was talking about, and I could pass those around to the rest of the commission, the ad hoc, actually.
No objection from the committee.
Thank you. With that, I think we're going to conclude this meeting.
Chair, will there be a community town hall on the tasers before we vote?
Well, we don't have, I mean, we've done 4, so the answer is I don't know, Irma. Why don't we talk about that? I support the town halls. It's difficult to make all of them happen, but I also believe that the most valuable information that we get often comes from town halls where community people speak without a timer. So I'm committed to that. But right now, I don't want to vote. And since the chair of the ad hoc has no objection, I think it gives us all time to dig into what we've heard today, because I suspected that this was going to be a difficult decision, and sure enough, it is. So we're going to conclude this meeting. I want to thank everyone for participating. Please join us next week for a educational conference series on deputies in the schools. We're not going to have a commission meeting in August because we take that off. That's the 1 month we don't hold a regular meeting. So we will see you at our next meeting on September 21st. And we're working to confirm the locations. So follow us on social media about where we will be next. As you know, we've been going to different locations, and that is because we're trying to get as much participation as we can. So to my commissioners, thank you. And I want to thank all of our speakers who really promoted this discussion. And for the public who stuck with us all this time, thank you.